Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 28th of June 2020. I hope everyone's coming through the chaos, the planned chaos that we're going through, intact as much as you can really hope for, because things are getting pretty nasty, of course, in certain quarters. And it's to be expected, naturally. There's a whole formula to what we're going through. And I've said before, we're living through a big script. So many times, we truly are living through a massive script. And it takes years to plan big changes, many, many years to plan them. As I've said before, I met people in the 80s who were involved with the far left. They like to portray themselves as really anti-war, but the real ones at the top of it all, the real core of it all, were really in for communism, pushing communism, and they blended even the early agenda with sexual orientations, etc., to get more and more members on board. And then they went into different ethnic groups to try to get them on board, disaffected groups and so on. So what we're living through today is a combination of all of those and more that were added on by those who run the world. And the people who run the world, I've often said, the top communists were always billionaires, always, even in the early days of the 20th century. That's what you find when you dig in deep enough. Some of them even had bank accounts, Swiss bank accounts, some of the most famous of them. It's well understood and declassified too. But we're living through, again, big changes, and don't think the communists are some separate group doing their own thing. I've always told you that there's only one really force at the top that runs all of this, all sides, and that's how you direct and shape the world. And again, you can't stress enough that Carol Quigley talked about it, that this is our group. He was referring to, at the very least, he was talking on behalf of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he had taken over their histories of them, their archives, to update them and so on. He certainly understood what was going on. And the Council on Foreign Relations, an American branch of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, they literally are the globalists. They're the ones who plan the future. They planned world wars. They admit that. They need wars to change the world. And as long as they can direct the shape and the course of the wars, then they can bring us all to what they wanted, the outcome that they wanted. And they said themselves, according to Quigley, that you can get more done in 5 years of war than 50 years of peace with social change. In peacetime, you've got to really do a lot of work, organizing and so on, as a communist would say, and training and preparation. And even it's a very slow process, trying to convince people to simply join you. But in wartime, you give up all your rights, and the authorities can then force you to go along. And you do it pretty willingly too, to save your life. You'll all die if you don't comply. We've heard that so many times. And that's what it's all about, you see. Quigley let so much out of the bag because he believed in the cause that the Council on Foreign Relations, Royal Institute for International Affairs, was all about. And that their effect in history and changing the courses of history for at least 100 years under different names, because they eventually settled on their last names, but they used different names in previous centuries. He said that they had such a tremendous impact on history and shaping history that he thought it was time that the public understood it. He thought they'd applaud it, in fact. He certainly did himself. He was all for it. But you've got to understand that nothing happens by itself. And I won't go over this, it's ad nauseum, basically repetition. But the fact is, they had their own private collection of archives, of histories, of things that really, the real causes behind things. That's quite something, isn't it? We're all getting taught the naive, accidental view of history. Things just happen by accident. And meanwhile, the perpetrators and their offspring take over, because often it's intergenerational, in fact, who get into these organizations. They're taught the real facts and what really happened in history. And we're going through it today. It's just astonishing to see, again, the naive, authorized version for the public to believe in, which is meant to keep you as rather simple and compliant and not to blame anybody. Of course, that's what they want. And meanwhile, it coexists side by side with, albeit a dwindling free speech on the internet of people who have got the other archives of what's really been happening up until now. It's really astonishing, isn't it, to live through it and watch it happening in live time sometimes, when some folk are getting murdered, but you're not allowed to say they're being murdered, and many newspapers just omit it altogether. It's a fascinating time to live through it and actually see it and experience it, knowing that when we get out of it, the system that then evolves or is pushed out of it will have all this expunged, you know. It'll be a seamless people's revolution during, coupled with a massive pandemic, they'll say. And that's what helped bring the changes about. Both of these things are false, because the pandemic was planned before, years before, at least the whole course it would run. And of course, the revolution too was waiting for the spike to happen. I personally think it was all coordinated together. I said before too, even with the China thing, with China showing us clips of folk just dropping in the streets, supposedly. And in a country that literally can censor everything in real time, they're really way ahead of some other places, some other countries. But they show you all that thing. Then they showed you the massive response that they had to it, of going, all the things they're going to bring in here, they did in China, January, February, March, and publicized it, including their home-to-home inspections and so on, door-to-door inspections, and mandatory testing down to the apps, mandatory apps on their phones to get into stores, etc., to prove they were safe to get in, yada, yada, yada. The stuff all we are going to go through, that was all planned even before China got it, as you know. But facts don't matter. I've said that so many times, that facts don't matter. And when there's big agendas in play. But they also showed us the massive mists of these machines just blasting stuff in hundreds of feet up into the air through the streets. And that was meant to terrify everyone in the West. And the West sat and watched it. Oh, we're terrified. And then Fauci himself said, early on, he said, I don't think it's anything really for the US to be worried about. Chuckle. And you find out that Fauci himself was heavily involved in the Wuhan laboratory and the setting up of it with the COVID virus that was sent to them, authorized by him, and money given to. This is incredible, that this stuff that goes. And yet the guy's back on TV apparently, spouting now that the riots are kind of dying down a bit and the protests are kind of dying down a bit. But he's back on TV, you know, telling about your lockdown, back to social distance, this nonsense, this delusion that was put out that we've all to follow, that 6 feet apart will stop the virus, even though it's a computer model that was invented in 2003 by a schoolgirl because her daddy worked for the military-industrial complex, the name Glass, you know. And had nothing to do with reality. It never had been done before. And yet they make this computer generated thing a law, like a law from God, because a computer technically is a front for the new God, the scientific rationale. And so science says that, therefore you can't get any more scientific than a computer. That's what they tell you. I used to have a tape recorder, it could give you better answers than the computer, but that doesn't matter, does it? Again, facts don't matter. You've all to behave in a very bizarre way as we go through the big revolution. It's amazing. And it's a political virus, isn't it? It can just be switched off because you say, switch off now, virus, because we have a political protest to take place. And even the folk that had us all locked down joining the protest, shoulder to shoulder, no 6 foot anything. But that's okay then, you see, because they told the virus to go and halt for a little while, hibernate for a little while. And once it started dying, but back again, here we go again. I said this would happen even in January and February. I said, here's how it will work. Because Fauci had said from the beginning, this will go all the way into vaccinations and vaccination passports, because they had discussions on this way even in 2017 and before. The same group of people that we already know what they would do with the big vaccine companies, etc., and right down to the names of who'd get the contracts. But again, facts don't matter, and these are facts. These are not speculations, So here you have it. We're watching. We're going through the stage play. Only we're like the Shakespearean plays, where Shakespeare and Stratford-upon-Avon, the way the stage was shaped, we kind of go off into the audience at one point, and to an extent, the whole thing was to involve the audience in the play. It was very, very effective at the time. Well, we are in the audience, but we're participants in the play at the same time. Very similar. It works awfully well, doesn't it? So Fauci said at the beginning that eventually we'd have immunity passports, and you'd have to have vaccinations before you're allowed out again into society and mix freely in society or go to work. That hasn't changed. The tune hasn't changed at all. There was no consideration whatsoever at the beginning of natural immunity like you do get with viruses, with everything basically. It was all decided that this vaccination program is imperative. Not just this vaccination, but every vaccination and every booster that they've got planned for you annually for the rest of your lives. I'm not kidding you. So this is an old agenda, but they brought it back in force this time. Quite fascinating to actually live through it, isn't it? And I thought at the time too, well, maybe China is on board being a globalist society and the model state for the world according to the CFR itself. Then maybe they're on board with it, and it's the whole public that have to be terrified of the planet. The whole population of the planet, I should say, should be terrified of it all. Maybe that's the agenda. Are they all playing their part in it? Are they? I think we're going through an awful lot of theatre right now. With top actors, you might say. That's what they call us all, mind you, if you're involved in anything to do with what happens in the world today, politically or socially or whatever. You're an actor, according to the United Nations. But the real actors are the ones at the top who are front people, really. The ones at the very, very top, they're front people for this big global agenda. And it's so convoluted to most folks' minds that they can't follow it. It's deliberately obscure to them, and they've been trained since childhood to listen to the news. Their authorized news is somehow legitimate and above board and above question. Why would they lie to you? These private corporations, many of them owned by the government agencies that run spy systems, and so why would they lie to you? It's quite fascinating, isn't it? But they've trained the people to be so naive, and when they see people come on it, they think everybody with a title of professorship, or whatever it happens to be, or a doctor, this, that, the other, must be genuine, and they would never ever lie politically to bend or skew a thought or some real point of science. And that's how simple it really is. Fauci is completely politicized, and so is Birx as well. They've made their career bureaucrats, really. And CEOs of some corporations too, some of them. But that's how it really is run, isn't it? And big agendas, and it's a global agenda. I used to keep mentioning the old television comedy series called MASH, with the intelligence officer called, I think it was called Colonel Flag. Colonel Flag. I'll try and put up a link, if it still works, to one of the MASH episodes where you actually see Colonel Flag, this kind of CIA operative, come into the camp and try to explain what he's there for. And every so often in a comedy, this kind of pseudo-comedy, it would have this guy who would burst in all clandestinely and so on, and be hiding, and he'd be found by Hawkeye or somebody, one of the doctors, And this major would say, "You didn't see me. I've never been here." And then when they got him talking, of course, he would say what he was really there for. He was there to confuse the enemy by implementing this to that, to this to that, like a chess game. And before he got more than a minute into the techniques of deception, everybody was completely bamboozled and lost, because you just couldn't fathom the logic of it. But that's how it really does work. And deception is just that. So, some nations have mottos about deception, how they use it in their intelligence agencies, because that's what it's all about. The best intelligence is always to make public think that you're invisible, that you don't exist. It's kind of like the devil, you know. They used to always say that Satan would win when he convinced the public that he didn't exist. Well, that's how intelligence agencies operate. Their job generally is to foment revolutions of one kind or another for their own political purposes, and to dominate and take over territory and resources and things like that, or even just political power. It's much easier to when you've got to put a tyrant in place. They've done it in Latin American countries when it suits them, and they dethrone them too when it suits them. That's how they work. But the great thing too is to get nations fighting each other without ever figuring out that you actually organised the set and set up them to fight each other. That's deceptive, you see. That happens all the time. Very, very old technique as well. Britain used it, or London. I hate to say Britain, because the British folk on it are just as out of it as everybody else down through time. London's a completely different kettle of fish. A very old system of money, power, and the techniques of power and acquisition of more wealth. That was always based in the city of London, going way, way, way back, to do with commerce and mercantile bankers. They owned the merchandise, the trading routes and so on, and they were also bankers to the crown and then eventually to the public. That's how it operated. Very old technique, way before even Britain was Britain. So it's no surprise to me that they can build up empires when it suits them, using a base when it suits them, and jumping off to another base when it suits them too, and using another country or even a group of countries like the European Union. This is how systems really work in this day and age. But they always like to say that, oh, so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, this country or that. No. They might use those countries to force things upon other countries, like they get the troops. You can always get troops from the working class folks in any country. I don't care who they are. And they always give the same take. You'll have respect if you put on that uniform. You'll be somebody. And that's what happens. And every nation across the planet, and across Africa too, by the way. India was the same thing. You'd be somebody. And actually it helps when it's a really heavy class system, because those at the bottom, like the untouchables in India, suddenly have got some kind of respect. You know, that's how it's done. And you go off in your cannon fodder for an enterprise which you'll never figure out. It's not meant that you figure out. Because for the troops themselves, you're always given the most basic propaganda as to why you're doing whatever you're doing. But what I'm getting at here is how the real big system works. As I've mentioned it before, the fastest way to unify a country is to introduce a foreign enemy into it. That's what happened with Vietnam. They had all these tribes fighting each other traditionally for centuries. And how do you unify them? Well, you bring in America to subdue it, supposedly, or to protect the South. And before you know it, that's united all the different groups that used to be fighting each other. And then now they're going to unite to fight the US. So you get centralization of authority very quickly. That's what happened there. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union, of course. You had you had all the people on your side, all the peasants and the serfs, you see, and you stand in be a spokesman for them, and But of course, the group that were advising them and training them and managing them had different plans for themselves. You know, only about 200 families took over running the Soviet system, and their descendants continued in it for a whole generation. You know. And they lived awfully well, just as at least as high in their lifestyles as the Tsars did. It's quite something else. But facts don't matter, does it, when it gets down to brass tacks? So yeah, you literally are living in a system where there's lots of these kernels. So behind the machinations of the top intelligence agencies, and they really are layered and compartmentalized, a need-to-know basis, and you don't ask questions depending on your rank. And it's quite easy for them to run this massive chessboard to get to an agenda that most folk will never figure out, really never figure out, because as I say, we've been trained to see things in one direction, in tunnel vision, and that makes it much more easier for them to run rings around us without us either knowing or noticing or understanding why things are actually happening. That's what happens on a daily basis, basically, nowadays. It's so precise, and long-term planning works awfully well when you've already worked out incrementally every possible stage of the implementation of parts of agendas. It's just astonishing and meticulous work goes into it all, including how the public will react, and different segments will react in different ways. They're all worked out before they make a move on any particular part of an agenda. It's pretty well perfect. And I always think of David Rockefeller when it comes to revolutions, and his agenda was part of an ongoing revolution that got on long before he was born. And he talked about it, David Rockefeller, he talks about the omelette. You know, he says that it's like an omelette, that the agenda itself that he was involved in, steeped in fact, his family too, were completely steeped in. He said it's like an omelette, and the fallout, meaning the people who die and so on, like revolutions and all that, not just inside the US but elsewhere across the world, because he was involved in the CIA as well. But you have an idea, the CIA is also meant to really bring America into the system that the Americans all paid for. They don't know they all paid for the present situation of the world. And once they paid for it all and implemented it all and supplied the cannon fodder for it all and the funding for it all, then they must be taken down as well. I gave that talk back in the late 90s, that very talk, and here we are. And the last people to really figure out are the ones who are stuffed at the end, the victims themselves that paid for all, supplied the military, etc. They're the last to see it, because they were. You don't. When you're using someone, you praise them in the eyeballs. You give them lots of good publicity for their own troops, for their own system, and how good we are, etc. And even though the general public never really understand what's really going or the reasons behind it all, of course you don't. What did America have to gain, for instance, by going after Iraq? Never mind the fact that they funded a lot of the modern system of Saddam Hussein. They funded it into existence, and then they take it down once it's used. It served its purpose, basically. But the average American couldn't figure out why should they, or Britain either for that matter, why Britain and America should be involved in taking down Iraq. That had nothing to do with 9/11. And because that was always a big agenda. The PNAC group talked about in the 90s before 9/11 happened. Here's a list, and Iraq was on it. So it's as good a time as any to take it down under the cover of 9/11, and Saddam was involved, which of course he was not involved with it at all. Facts don't matter, as I say. We're living through an amazing agenda, and the fallout from it too, of displacing. Once you bomb countries into the Stone Age, they knew darn well that under the UN policies, which they also own and run, by the way, would then export the fallout, the refugees into Europe, and all worked out way ahead. They called it blowback before they started to blow. And there you go. We're living through it. So the fallout, this will do this will do that, and this will hit this, make this happen. That's how it is, you see. Right down to what's happening today. And look at throughout Europe and Britain even, lots of those people who came in at the time after 9/11, and refugees and so on, since then, and they all, even though they had nothing to do with the war, a lot of them too weren't even in countries involved in wars. Didn't matter. They're now the young guys that are protesting and even tearing down statues, being led again with very European-looking activists, and there's no mystery to that, to the different intelligence agencies that they work for. And they're multi-layered as well. You have to get to this one, to that one, to that one, to get to the boss of them all. But you'll always find the CIA at the very, very top, and the same foundations that Rockefeller worked for, or definitely worked for. He was the head of some of them, for at least the chairman of sometimes these organizations. But as he said, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Breaking eggs is destroying societies. Breaking eggs is destroying lives and collateral damage, abroad and at home. I hope you're getting the picture, huh? And it was such a cozy relationship with David Rockefeller, with the intelligence agencies, because the intelligence agencies came out from World War II, from the OSS, that was run by the same group in Britain, Royal Institute for International Affairs. In fact, the headquarters of it was based in their building, you know. And it never changed for a long, long time. In fact, that was their main headquarters. And the US, their department for the OSS worked there as well during World War II. And even afterwards, the U.S. side of it, when it became the Council on Foreign Relations, his head was David Rockefeller, you know. And often a lot of the different operations they had on the go had to go through some kind of bookwork and requisitions for money to get things on the go and working. And to speed things up, they said, some of them, I've read their memoirs, and so they used to go straight to David Rockefeller. He would come in and out of their headquarters frequently, and they would ask him for money for this project. He was completely integrally involved in them all. This great philanthropist, you see, with the big foundations that he owned, Rockefeller Foundation, that's still on the go today, still running the show basically for the US. And has already naturally got all the completely drafted agenda for coming out of COVID, which will take literally have no rights at all. You'll be a pincushion for vaccine companies, and you've got to have them be registered with all before you be allowed into this. This is where it's all supposed to go. CIA, color revolutions, CIA. Huh? There you go. So I might touch on some of that tonight. And you have to get in. It's not conspiracy theory. It's only conspiracy theory to those who refuse to crack a book, and they don't crack the books from the a lot of these guys who worked as agents, you know, put so much in their memoirs, and it'd be classed as declassified stuff. Very few folk read that because it's kind of boring too, naturally, and folk aren't really involved in what happened in even the recent past, and that it still seems old to them, even though it's maybe 1960s, 1970s, 1980. It seems old to them, but really that's nothing in history. And it's important to know that kind of stuff to find out where you got from there to the present day. It's all important. But most folks, as I say, can't and don't want to. They want to be told in a few sentences what they think, like Brzezinski said. And unfortunately, it's here. And you do it, as I say, like Quigley said, you know, 5 years of war versus 50 years of peace and indoctrination. So here we are in our umpteen years of war, and then they brought in COVID with a complete lockdown, along with what's meant to appear as a revolution inside the nation. And it's all the appearances of that too. It's an organized, it's not just accepted revolution, it's been devised by the powers that really rule the US and the world. Not from the grassroots, but from the top. Absolutely, no doubt about it. Meant to be, and it won't have the effect of what those at the bottom thinking the running all want. That they'll get a show of that for a little while, but believe you me, what's to come into this system is going to have no favoritism eventually at all. We're all going to suffer massively because of it. We know that. That's how things really work. When you have the ones at the top who are eugenicists, who own the world's wealth, who command nations to rise and fall according to the investments. They can either pull out or even bail out countries when it comes to that, but it comes with a tremendous cost. These are the characters who run everything, who are all on board with this supposed revolution. Can't you figure this one out here? Huh? And there's nothing to figure out. When the WEF, the World Economic Forum, said that, they'd have to start bypassing the usual democratic processes to get the job done for sustainability, because the public were ignoring them. Well, here you go, bingo. How do you think they're doing it? And isn't it strange that this, what appears to be this anti-fascist Black Lives Matter movement, etc., all well funded and well organized, and you can trace the funders, you can trace the organizers too, and intelligence agents involved with them. But here they're pushing all that, and they're all involved with the same thing: population reduction. That's pretty well in their plans, actually, because you see, everyone's an enemy of nature, which is destroying the planet, and it's not good for sustainability. They're parroting the same stuff that ultra elitists have been saying for years. And businesses should not open up unless they're sustainable and they're proven sustainable and they won't pollute, etc., etc. Here, yet the whole agenda's here, and folk think it's all to do with a spontaneous rebellion beginning in the States. There's nothing further from the truth. And the WEF are all happy about what's happening. So multi-billionaires are happy about it. And the Club of Rome, the big think tank that works for it, who came up with the idea of blaming humanity for climate change. It's all your fault, therefore let's implement sustainability. Because sustainability was a goal in the first place. How do you get the folk to give up all their rights while you're killing the planet? Oh, there you go. Here we are. It's quite an agenda, really. But most folk can't figure it out because they're kept in the dark. If you keep tuning into television every day, I'm sorry to say, you won't have a chance in hell. TV is not spontaneous. Anything you see in TV, even your newscast, is worked out by experts in advance, for each day, how to put something across. Psychologists can get brought in, and neuroscientists and behaviorists, and how to advise them to how to write a particular part of a script for a news recast and so on. That's how it's done. What to tell the public, what not to tell the public. There's more not to tell the public than tell them these days. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're seeing the fallout, as I say, the broken shells of the omelette everywhere now, and a lot more to come. And as you go into it, I'm telling you, and this is not to give fear-mongering or cause fear-mongering, but they're definitely going to manage it as they're managing it. But when it gets bad and even worse, if you listen to the media, they're there to tell you to deny your own sensibilities and your own observations. That's their job. To manage the chaos as we go through it, regardless of the fallout. They'll tell you that things are still just going along, and there's still folk protesting, and still this and still that, and the COVID's bad, blah, blah, blah. But they're not going to tell you any truth on anything. They have formats for every particular instance that can happen of terrorism even. You don't get terrorists now. Internally, you get folk who are mentally ill. That is the standard agenda. That's what you'll always be told, you see. And you're supposed to accept it. Oh, well, what could you do? Some people just go crazy all the time, and that's it, you see. I say have a semi-plausibility for the public to swallow. And that's where we are today. But things are going to get worse in a lot of directions. And before I get into the subjects in any really deeper way at all, I'd like to just mention that I really go through the emails that I get sent from all over the world, from people who give their opinions on what they see personally. See, that's real history in the making as it happens. That's the only way it can be real history, is what you see and experience yourself. Not what you'll read in 10, 20 years' time, but when it's all been cleansed and filtered and authorized and so on. That's always how it really is in the Western societies. So you have to keep note of things, but it's good to share it of your own personal experiences. No one is little. There's no such a thing as a little person in this world. We're all just equally important, believe you me, when it comes to getting through this system that's insane at times, and sharing what you're noticing and experiencing as we go through chaos, planned chaos, and putting your own thoughts to it, because that's, as I say, that's what matters, your own interpretation of your experiences and what you see. So keep sending information to me, because it truly does. It opens up a world. And that's how you can connect things when you see the same things happening across the planet about the same time, in sequence too. Different kind of incidents that will happen across the world at the same time. That doesn't happen accidentally. Of course it does in this organization. And I think it's important too for folks on mental health to share what they know, because I've said before, the hardest thing in this world, the hardest thing, if you understand, you don't have to know everything or understand everything, but understand enough of how the world is working in a world where you're not meant to be able to think outside the box. You've been kept in the dark, so to speak, been trained to stay in the dark, so to speak. And that's what Bertrand Russell said too. He said education, according to Fichte, was meant to keep people dumb, actually, and make them dumber. That was the intention of it. He was all for that, of course, except for the elite class. He said that himself, two kinds of people eventually, the elite class and the rest of the public. And the elite class, they said the differences would be like two different species of animal, basically. That's what he said in his own books, Lord Bertrand Russell. Again, another lord that played this strange left-wing agenda, because left-wing is the agenda. It's much more efficient, because folk can't argue with you under democratic rights. You just tell them what they're going to do, or else, and that's it. So, anyway, that's what we're living through today, is a system, an amazing system, very long-term, and much of it was planned before you were born. Definitely the conclusions were all mapped out as to where they want to take the world, and we're rushing through it right now. So yeah, just keep sending me your emails, let me know how things are happening. I'll tell you something that's comical too. I've noticed this for years. I would do talks, and within about 3 days, I'd start to get emails coming back to me with links to stories I should look up and look into, and these were the ones that I'd put out in the first place. It just happens. It still happens, yeah. And folk hear, because they'll hear other folk grabbing the stuff and repeating it, you see, and putting it up, and then they send it back to me in a circular thing. And if they don't realize that I put it out before the rest of them, that's where they came from. I don't mind that at all. At least it shows you the speed that things can get around and information can get around. And occasionally you get a chuckle too, because recently someone in the States had told me that there's a guy, there are ways that you can actually get shows, radio shows, on your phone, apparently. You can, as long as you have the phone, you can listen into it through your phone, even landlines, if you can dial them up, some of them. And you could hear shows, and a guy had been listening to shows, and he thought this guy was pretty good, you know. And eventually, I kept forgetting the name of the fella, but eventually he got in touch with me, and he said, this is his name. So I looked the guy up, and this fella in the States had listened on the phone, you see, and the reason he listened on the phone is because he's Mennonite, and they're not supposed to they go any higher than the phone line, basically, for technology in the particular group that he's in. Anyway, I looked in it, eventually got the guy on his website and all the rest of it, and he was doing my shows verbatim every week, this fella, without ever mentioning where he got all the information from. And I guess what he's using is, now they're using programs, they can literally take your talk and I'll put it instantly into the printed word, and he would read it off his computer. But it was verbatim of my shows, right down to when he said, I think last week, the week before, oh, it's going to take longer this week, probably 4 hours. This went to 4 hours each talk I did, verbatim, without ever mentioning where he got this stuff from. So I was getting this circular stuff of my own links coming back via his stuff by people who'd listened to it and sending it back to me. Quite amazing, isn't it? So that's how things work. Yeah. So I'll wait and see if the guy gets the word to perhaps either be a bit more decent or send a few bucks my way, because I'm doing all the work for him, you see, and others as well. And he probably will never get a penny from him anyway, but at least he should have the decency to see where he got it from. That's a rather low-handed. That's the kind of society we're in, you see. Everything's so corrupt, and there's no decency left in people. It's true, isn't it? We are at the end of an era. There's no doubt about it. It's everywhere you look, where governments are totally corrupt, and they have been forever. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter how you make government. Corruption is in society, especially in an atheistic society. I'll get hammered for saying it, but it's the truth. Because in atheism, you aren't even taught as a child moral rights and wrongs. It's just not there. In fact, in modern society and pure materialism, it's getting to the top that's worshipped. You understand, the so-called celebrities you're taught to worship. Would you actually follow them if they're on $15 an hour? Would you? Of course you wouldn't. But you worship them because look at the fame and money they've got and yada, yada, yada. That's why you do it. Well, with that attitude, how can you have rights and wrongs and fairness in society? You can't. Of course you can't. But it's right down to the bottom level, like I've said. Folk will just use your stuff right down to verbatim, right down to the 4 hours I put out, and copy it and then they regurgitate it verbatim, word for word, line by line, without changing it. And I never say where it really came from. But that's what we're living through today. It is quite a society indeed. And it wouldn't matter if you had 10 revolutions, because folk have it built into them now without any restrictions, that you get to the top of your career or whatever it happens to be, just get to the top. There's no rights and wrongs, there's no moral codes, as I say. That's how it is. And so it will always be corrupt, unfortunately. It really will. And the truth of this world, with this intelligence agencies running this show, is that everything that's happening today was planned before you had the intelligence agencies to implement it all covertly. It's an old agenda, and has willing fools. It knows exactly what to use, and the fringe element. The fringe element are the ones who got really radicalized. A lot of them are very disturbed, And they said that we shall release the nihilists and the atheists, and Mazzini talked about it. And Mazzini, of course, was a protege of Albert Pike for World Revolution, and he was the head of the World Revolution Society, which became the Communist Party under Lenin eventually. And folk think that Masonry is just a philosophical thing that helps men, like a self-help program, where they can just share their problems and help each other out. They can certainly share their problems and help each other out to an extent, but in the process, they forget the history of Freemasonry, which was always revolutionary. Of course it was. When their main enemy was, say, a Christian church. At least in the West, it was Christian church. And they had no problem really in England, because early on England had been taken over from its original Catholicism to the Church of England through Henry VIII. And so it was much easier with the crown or the monarch being the head of the Church of England to govern it, especially since the monarchs eventually all became Masons themselves. But then they used Freemasonry to go across the rest of Europe to eliminate Catholic influence elsewhere. And it's well documented in certain history books. And it's not speculation at all. Of course it was done. And again, Trotsky himself, if you read his own books, like My Life, he tells you that he really fell into Masonry big time when he had done his mandatory, part of your initiation into true communism. And it was to foment revolution and get put in prison for a little while, where you met other revolutionaries, and that was like a badge of honor. Interestingly, they've reintroduced the same kind of idea by giving folk who get put in from the protests, even some of the rioters too, in prison or in jail for overnight, they give them awards that they can wear, actually, like little medals, etc. Very sad. There's nothing that happens that's brand new at all, is it? Anyway, Trotsky mentioned that he became a Freemason while in prison, and eventually he started to write books, copious tomes really, on the wonders of Freemasonry, which is so essential for bringing in the world socialistic system. And if you look at the banners that were carried by unions, for instance, and for in Britain, across Europe and elsewhere, you see the Masonic symbols everywhere you look. Antifa itself, as part of the doctrine by the founders, was to communicate with symbols, if you understand that. Starting with the fist, which of course was the communist one, but starting with the fist, and then a whole bunch of other symbols too, as a form of communication that would go over the heads of people who were just studying them. So before I go into this again, remember you can go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com website and help yourself to the shows that are put up there. I hate calling them shows. They're not really shows. They're always talks. Because a show smacks of entertainment, doesn't it? And I don't do entertainment these days. So help yourself to that. You'll learn an awful lot. Most folk do that. You'd be surprised how many folk are using that. And there's even some folk making their livings of it. But you can help me out by buying the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and I've got stacks of them printed up recently. And as I say, this stuff's going out, and it'll take a while to catch up. Not too long, hopefully. So be patient. As we're all being taught to be patient. We can't get what we want immediately anymore. And up here in Canada, by the way, where I am, you can't even get yeast in the stores for bread. Well, the bakeries, they are still getting it because they churn out their loaves and so on. There's no shortage. But I don't live in a city. I'm outside. And there are no stores around me to buy bread, so I make my own bread. But you can't get yeast now up here. Quite something. So as I say, go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com website, buy the books and discs, and help me take a lot. You can donate to me too. You find out how to do it. And cash is fine even, and checks are fine, and PayPal, etc. You can get the cash to me somehow, so I can tick along with all the sites I have. Believe me, this is not something I've said this before. Why I came out in the first place back in the 90s to talk about this stuff wasn't because I really wanted to. It's because I had to. I saw what was going to happen. I could smell it. I knew it. I listened to what was called the alternative media at the time on the radio, but then, and I realized that they were right in some of the things, but the so-called Patriot Radio had no idea the big world agenda. And so I came out to explain to them what was really happening. And I kind of rocked the boat a bit, because Again, intelligence agencies tend to run all sides of everything. They really do. This is not speculation. And I went through the history of even radio, shortwave too, where the CIA had funded up some Christian organizations back in the 60s to combat the influence of communist broadcasting. And so it made sense at the time, but they never let go a lot of this stuff. You got to remember that too. And it's still the same today. But I came along and kind of rocked the boat by eventually showing that what was really happening. I came out with the CFR's agendas, the world agendas, and so on, and much, much more. And the other ones that existed were kind of authorized, had to start following me for a while. And I did rock the boat, there's no doubt about it. And I had the usual offers to get on board, etc. And if I didn't do it, so yeah, you'll suffer for sure. But you have to do the right thing in life, even if it's only for yourself. You really do. If you lose yourself, what is left? Come on, what is left? So you've got to do it yourself. And by doing it for yourself, hopefully you do it for enough people that are decent out there, decent, good people. And there are decent, good people out there, lots of them. They're generally isolated, and just like I say, you live inside your head, because it can be unsafe at times to talk to people around about you who are perfectly well indoctrinated, and their indoctrination has worked on them, you see. It can be unsafe at times to voice your thoughts. And now, of course, you're getting to the stage where it'll be imperative that you live inside your head, because when you go through revolutions, they're authorized from the very top too. Especially, most of them are actually, have always been that way, really. And the old Bolshevik one was too, I'm pretty certain of it. Especially when I had the funding of coming from the US and Britain and London and so on. But it eventually becomes rather ruthless, and the new dogma is a religion. It's always is a religion, basically. You have to recite all the different communist or Karl Marx tenets, etc. And the children had to prattle off at school. Mao Zedong in China had the same thing, the little red book for the Chinese children. You might see some clips today, if they're still up there, where you would see the school children waving their little red books, chanting it in unison, verse by, just like a Bible, you see. And that's what you get. You have to prove your loyalty to this new system. And socialism demands complete loyalty. You're given no choice in it at all. You have to be one of them or not at all. And if you're not one of them, you're dangerous. And even if you are one of them, you often can't prove it enough for them. You have to keep being so politically correct. And the virtue signal, I call it preening, because you're going to preen just like a big bird, in front of the other birds, and they preen themselves and stick out their chest to show how beautiful they are. And that's what you see today. That's what you see with all revolutions. The ones at the top want attention. They eventually fight each other for attention. But as people pull out of it too, sometimes you find that if they get into a slaughter stage, which revolutions unfortunately often go into, especially when the governments are allowing it to happen, the people start to get really cocksure themselves. They really think they're the bosses. They really do. And they can go rather nasty and berserk. But you'll find too that people get fed up with it too, that say their own kind of lockdowns, as an example, in barricades or barricaded areas like they had in France in the past, and their revolutions, and they did a few of them, or in the States at the moment, their autonomous areas, as folk get fed up with it and try to pull out, or the shootings and the side get worse, or whatever it happens to be. They can turn on them, the ones who are more adamant, and the leaders can turn them viciously for as traitors, you see, for not going the whole way and suffering with the rest, etc. You got to suffer in these religions, that's part of it. But you always suffer for the good of all, the greater good of what's to come, you see. And if old David Rockefeller was alive today, he'd be glorying it, and he'd be absolutely bathing in what's happening today, because he and the CIA and the organization, CFR, that he belonged to. And don't forget, the CFR is also, just like any other intelligence agency, it's literally, as I've said already, it's compartmentalized. But the ones at the top have a better understanding of where the world's supposed to go. And they always get their own cash out way before any financial crashes or changes in regimes. And they're told where to put it, which is guaranteed to be okay. Because the ones at the top are the ones who are financing revolutions, etc. It always works out that way. But nothing really is ever as it really seems. It really isn't as it seems. We've lived through years of them going through ideas of getting us to stop having children. They're quite open about it now. In fact, I've done lots of talks on that too. And it's not speculation. It's not paranoia. It's not conspiracy theory. It's fact. Bill Gates himself is one of a eugenicist, and from a lineage of eugenicists, like many of them actually are, whose parents and grandparents all knew each other too, because they all worked in the same organizations. But it's quite amazing to see it continue, and still with intention of bringing down populations. And folk always think, well, we're not breeding much, so they don't mean us. No, the West was the first ones that they tried all this stuff on. And Bertrand Russell talked about that years ago. But we do live in an amazing system. It's like it is a maze. That's why it's amazing. There's so many different directions it goes off, and dead ends, etc. Very well designed, of course, but if you designed it from the top, from above, you can see it's easy to find out what it's all about. The general public are not supposed to be able to think their way through certain things, and even what they want you to think through is they've got all kinds of diversions along the way to drag you here, there, and everywhere, and in all kinds of directions. There are dead ends, or until you give up, or else you sound crazy. And counterintelligence is very effective, and what they've done for years is put out people with incredible stories that would take you off into the bizarro. Although the world is bizarre enough, mind you, all of this is bizarre. What we're talking about is bizarre, what intelligence agencies get up to. But of course, they've also used people to come in and make stars out of them that will drag you off into La La Land. And then, of course, if you stick to the basic facts, they'll compare you to the ones in La La Land and actually say, oh, you're one of them that believe in blah, blah, blah. Part of counterintelligence. It's very effective. And even if you expose some of the characters, they'll say, well, they put out some good stuff too, you know. Folk like them. They like them. So they put up good stuff as well, though. It's not all, you know. Say, yeah, but that's the poison. You know, you take 95% or 98% of the facts that are churned out. They grab that stuff, then they add the 2% poison until it ridicules all the rest of the true information. That's how it works. Very, very. Do you really expect of such a powerful organization that boasts, like the Council on Foreign Relations is one example. Don't forget, too, the same organization that created them, created the Trilateral Commission. It's all one big club, you see, and many other specialized branches as well, including the think tanks that then supposedly advise governments what to do in different kinds of policies, all kinds of policies, and social policies, and military policies, and so on. It's all one big club. They're all related, all these characters, to the same clubs. But that's how you run the world. You don't let things happen that's outside your control. That's the beauty of them, really, in a sense. It's macabre and it's sardonic as well, and rather evil, you might say. But when there's an old technique to why let things happen by itself? Why would you let true revolution happen by itself by just ignoring it until it bursts out? Well, what you do is for instance, you give the working class their leaders as an example, and then you guide them. And the leader will apparently be very successful at times too in getting demands for some workers and all that. But that's the trick that they use. And they always win eventually, because after a while they literally completely 100% own these negotiators that talk on behalf of the workers. And then you have the negotiations, right? And you have the dialogue of arguments of how much you're going to give the workers, etc. And then, of course, you bring in Marxist policy into the unions, and it's taught openly that this strange policy of, okay, we're going to have a completely different system. I'm chasing mosquitoes in my house here. Hold on. Now, the whole idea of this revolution is with its religion. We'll have a few basic tenets. We're all equal, except some are more equal than others. That's the Orwellian policy too. And that's what you find right off the bat. Some are more equal than others, and that's what you've been told now. And those who disclaim are going to have been persecuted in the past so much should be ruling over the rest now as a form of punishment. That was also promoted through United Nations and these so-called healing circles that they had in South Africa. I used to watch that, and you would see people who, in different tribes as well, in different factions within different segments, and very tribal in Africa, and very ancient anger, hatreds for different things that happened in the past between the different groups, etc. Even families that were really big families were really, in a sense, tribes. But you'd have these talks, these circles, and they'd argue out who had done injustices to whom, and what they would do about it, and so on. And it never worked out very well at all. They really didn't, because they tend to bring out the hurts of the past even more so by airing them again and never coming to any agreement, really. But they never stopped trying it. So you're seeing the same thing happening in the West as well, because it's the same CIA-type organization with the Color Revolution that's managing this one inside the States. It's rather evident. We float through society. We float through time, our own time, in our little bubble, in our existence for so many years on this planet. We float through. And most folk, again, are so concerned about just surviving in their little bubble with however much they can get. If they're ambitious, they try to get a big bubble and be above all the rest of the little bubbles. But a lot of folk just get by with maybe a family or themselves even, and try to have a little bit of security. They're not too ambitious, and they're often very nice people because they're not ambitious. So ambitious, they don't want to dominate anything. But they have a hard time existing as well, because everything that matters in life is outside your control. Invisible people whom you never even know. You don't even know if they exist, actually, but you'll never meet them for sure. Run economies. They run the value of your currency day to day, and how much your currency is going to buy, how many tins of beans it will buy this week compared to last week, because it goes up and down, and you have no say in the matter at all. It's like magic, because it is magic. It's not based on any reality anymore. It's been completely commandeered by those at the top, and but they go through their lives hearing little bits and pieces about colour revolution. It doesn't really make much of an imprint in them, because if the media doesn't tell you to really now stop now and think about this and make a big deal, then they won't, because they do expect, like Brzezinski said, the media to do their reasoning for them. That's how bad it is now. That's what they came to expect it, and it has happened. And if the media doesn't tell them to be... I can remember when they made a big deal with a prostitution ring in Africa. I can't remember if it was Nigeria where it was, but it was young girls that were getting really grabbed and put off as slaves somewhere else and sold off. And we're all told to be so concerned about it, so concerned about it. And it was a mantra in the papers for a few weeks, maybe even months. But meanwhile, as other groups were coming into Britain and setting up prostitution rackets here with young 12-year-old girls, getting them hooked on drugs, very organised, hooked on drugs, and then pimped out as young addicts and so on. And thousands of them actually involved in this. The media and the governments were turning completely a blind eye to it all, and pretending it didn't exist. In fact, everybody was so terrified losing their jobs if they mentioned it, they'd fire folk that would bring up the subject. Isn't that amazing? Rather than do anything about it. But you're supposed to be worried what happened. Understand, the media is not there to help you. It never has been. And its intentions, you'll never figure out what its real intent happens to be. But it's rather astonishing what's been happening here. Now, hold on a second while I find this article I'm talking about. Now, getting back to what I've said before, the test for sterility or sterilizing the West was already done. It was already done in Britain before it was done anywhere else. Now here's a few things that Bertrand Russell said. I used to read from his books on the air at times, and someone sent some of the stuff back to me that I'd done years and years ago, I guess. And it's worthwhile going over, because when you have to go into the history of Bertrand Russell and who his father was and grandfather was. Way up there, of course. One of them, in fact, was brought in to be in charge of the relief corn and food from America and other places, but mainly America, to Ireland during the famine. And of course, we know what happened there. A lot of it was just stopped or refused or diverted to other places. And you wouldn't believe the things that went on in the past with the great authorities that looked after you, right? Looked after you. But yeah, Lord Amberley. Amberley was a title that his father got, Bertrand Russell's father. And his mother was Catherine Louisa Stanley. And she was a suffragette, of course, and friends with world revolutionaries such as Mazzini. And I think Mazzini and a couple other ones were the godfathers of Bertrand himself. It's just astonishing. Why would the British lords, right, who got their start, a lot of them, especially the Russells, by confiscating Catholic property at one point, and church property and the land, etc., and who even went into money lending once they'd done that and broken ties with the Catholic Church. They said, well, we can also do money lending, etc., and they did that too, and they became very rich and staunch supporters, naturally, the crown, and were involved in their nobility. So there you go. I mean, yeah, and here they are with an open house basically for world revolutionaries. Can't you see there's something that just doesn't jive there? Why would top lords who were helping run a British or a London, I would call it the London Empire of the world at the time, be involved with revolutionaries? A much bigger agenda you see behind it. Anyway, he was a British mathematician, philosopher, an adamant internationalist. Again, internationalist, you see. And he wrote some books, and I've actually read them on the air, as I say. But he was also a member of the Fabian Society and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, naturally, which is a private club. That's the granddaddy for the Council on Foreign Relations and the European branch of the Foreign Affairs that runs the parliamentarians in the EU Parliament. And then the Eastern Pacific Rim group as well. I've been through the history before. But anyway, here they are involved in all these things that we'd think are the opposites of what they're actually up to. But no, they run all sides of everything, you see. And what he said, Russell, is his scientific societies are as yet in their infancy. It may be worthwhile to spend a few moments in speculating as to possible future developments of those that are oligarchies. It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality. Do you understand that? Individual mentality than they now have, even in totalitarian countries. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Now, I'll say that again. I know some folk can catch it right off the bat, but most folk they're not used to having to think about things, especially a paragraph like that. They get little bits and bytes of statements from newscasters, and that's all they're supposed to ever dwell on it, as long as the newscaster is talking. Don't even remember his last sentence. It's done in such a way. So here you are, scientific societies aren't yet in their infancy, right? And this is maybe in 1950s he wrote this one. It may be worthwhile to spend a few moments in speculating as to possible future developments of those that are oligarchies. It is to be expected that advances in physiology, and psychology, just talking about your biological system too, and your mind, two things here, will give governments much more control, right? Advances is to do with control over individual mentality than they now have, even in totalitarian countries. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will. That's the philosopher. After pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Okay? Now, just to get a breath there and think now, look at everything that's happening now. It's been happening for a long time. I've said they've been raising a generation for revolution here. Where did they get taught it? Starting off at school, right off the bat and right through their school, from junior to high school and to college. And you've got completely educated revolutionaries who literally think that what they're promoting is their own ideas. Think about it. But advances, he's talking about sciences and scientific advances in your physique as well, by the way, physiology, right? Look at the shape of we're changing, folks. And psychology, right? Yeah, much more control over individual mentality. And then I've said this so many times that eventually it's like a mantra out there, and lots of folk use it. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Think about it. Think about that. Psychologically impossible. And then he says, gradually by selective breeding, the congenital differences between the rulers and the ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebeians would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. That's his sarcasm kicking in. In like manner, the scientific rulers will provide one kind of education for ordinary men and women, and another for those who are to become holders of scientific power. Scientific power, see? Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, that's your entertainment and so on, and contented. Of these qualities, probably contentment will be considered the most important. In order to produce it, all the researches of psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and biochemistry, will be brought into play. There you go. All the boys and girls will learn from an early age to be what is called cooperative. This is a new normal, you see, cooperative. It means no bullying, right? I mean, don't stand up. If someone punches you at school, don't fight back, right? So you'd all be cooperative. That is to do exactly what everybody is doing, meaning everybody else is doing. Initiative will be discouraged in these children. That's true. It's all groupthink now. Don't think for yourself. What do you mean, John? You won't go along with this particular conclusion on this topic. No, I don't really believe. Well, you're shunned, you see, and the whole class is meant to shun you, etc. And so initiative will be discouraged in these children, and insubordination without being punished will be scientifically trained out of them. Okay. Scientifically trained out of them. There you go. And that's what they've got now. There certainly is, when especially the young boys, for many years now, 20, 30 years, 20-odd years, 25 years, maybe 30, have been given really amphetamines. To me, amphetamine speed, which makes you hyper, they've been given that and other drugs too, if they show that they're really have any leadership qualities at all, and they're intelligent enough to vocalize their own opinions about certain topics that they're getting taught, etc. There are problems, or maybe even restless in school. Boys are not girls, at least they never used to be at school, and that's why they had to have the regular breaks. And as soon as you got out, when you were young, about between 5 and 12, as soon as you got out in these breaks, you'd run like the wind. You'd run all over the place and chase each other and get rid of that energy. That gave you the ability to sit for another 1.5, 2 hours in school till the next break. That's how it worked, folks, and that's why it was there. But now you're supposed to be quiet and docile, and they drug you if you fidget or whatever, and that was all intentional and nothing to do. And all these fake and new diagnoses that came in were all literally that, fake, run by the Psychiatric Association and drug industry, with a much bigger agenda in mind, folks. Of course it was. So you'd all learn from, all the boys and girls would learn from an early age to be what is called cooperative, to do exactly what everybody else is doing. Initiative will be discouraging these children, and insubordination without being punished will be scientifically trained out of them. Second, as regards population, if there is not to be a permanent and increasing shortage of food, is Malthusian, you see, agriculture must be conducted by methods which are not wasteful of soil. An increase of population must not over or outrun the increase in food production, rendered impossible by technical improvements. Okay? And then he says, to deal with this problem of too many folk, right? It will be necessary to find ways of preventing an increase in world population. If this is to be done otherwise than by wars, pestilences, and famines, it will demand a powerful international authority. Powerful international authority? And that's WEF prattling on about this too in the Club of Rome, and same thing, eh? We need a powerful international authority. And they've already said in the last meeting for the climate change agenda, you know, the climate conference, they had a conference of parties, like to call it. They said that it's time now to go the next step and start demanding that we reduce the population, like mandatorily. Like who can breed and who won't breed. That was an old agenda, but these are always you. The same agenda hasn't changed. That's why it's old and new always at the same time. It says this authority should deal out the world's food to various nations in proportion to their population at the time of the establishment of the authority. If any nation subsequently increases its population, it should not on that account receive any more food. The motive for not increasing population would therefore be very compelling. What method of preventing an increase might be preferred should be left to each state to decide. Now, let's see, you are going to see mandatory and definitely promoted famine of some kind or another. That's part of what we're going through now. This isn't just a Black Lives Matter thing. This is also the COVID idea, the World Health Authority, the CDC in the States, all these different organizations that really are part of the intelligence agency. And they're going to make it, you're going to see rationing. You will see rationing. So they want a global organization. They'll be in charge of all the food of the planet. There you go. This is, and each state is, each country is interested. So it's the same agenda written in the 1950s and became a part of the Agenda 21 for the 21st century and 2030, etc., etc. It's the same agenda, isn't it? Something, eh? He also said, our members who are so important that for their sake we should patiently permit this state of affairs to come about, surely not what then can we do. Apart from certain deep-seated prejudices, the answer would be obvious. The nations which are presently increasing rapidly should be encouraged to adopt methods by which in the West the increase of population has been checked. So I'll say that again. Apart from certain deep-seated prejudices, the answer would be obvious. The nations which are presently increasing rapidly should be encouraged to adopt methods by which in the West the increase of population has been checked. Has been checked. See? In the West, The increase has been checked. Now, what do you think he meant by that? What's the biggest problem in the West? Infertility now. It's just quite something. So there you go. And educational propaganda with government help could achieve this result in a generation with this indoctrination. There are, however, two powerful forces opposed to such a policy. One is religion. The socialists always have to destroy religion because it makes you think, I've got rights from God, not from you. And says the other is nationalism. He says, I think it is the duty of all who are capable of facing facts to realize and to proclaim that opposition to the spread of birth control, if successful, must inflict upon mankind the most appalling depth of misery and degradation, and that within another 50 years or so. So degradation within about 50 years or so, he says. So there you go. So it says, again, I think it is a duty of all who are capable of facing facts to realize and to proclaim that opposition to the spread of birth control, the birth control to abortion as well, if successful, must inflict upon mankind the most appalling depth of misery. You must all be taught that the whole world is going to be awful if there's too many of you, basically, and that within another 50 years or so. So it's all been done about the year 2000, and we're not all crammed together. Most of the European population it's not even quite stable, but it's mainly through mass migration. So you're thinking you're doing good by not having children, but it's not good enough. No, now we've got to bring people. So you can't win. You understand? There's another agenda behind all of this. And it's always been the transhumanists of Julian Huxley, their world, and how they would bring it into technological age and how they would run and rule their own world without all of the people being around. It might take them years to just reduce the population, but it's been that the population of the planet they want reduced, you see. And you won't go along with it if you really didn't bring in masses of migrants in, and you're complying with depopulation. You say, well, why are you forcing this on us? Our population is already dropping. We're awfully good. We're doing what you're telling us. Well, it's not good enough, you see. It's for a whole global agenda. And then you seem to be overrun with too many folk in your own countries only because of mass migration. You must feel that this is the whole world. It's not the whole world. It's forced to be upon you as though it is the whole world, and you go along with it, you see. He also said here that I do not pretend that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. There are others which one might suppose opponents of birth control would prefer. War, as I remarked a moment ago, has hitherto been disappointing in this respect. And it's got what I said before here. That's what it's taken from one of my talks. It says, I'll repeat that for the hard of thinking. That's what I always say. And war, as I remarked a moment ago, has hitherto been disappointing in this respect. Don't forget, too, that at the end of World War II, there was it was really classed as a world meeting and as a royal, it was held by, I think the chair was the King of England before he died. The whole meeting was a mass meeting about depopulation. They said that the war hadn't killed enough people off. And anyways, he admitted that they use wars to kill off people and grab, of course, the resources, etc. And that's all you get in Britain was one war after another. That was taken over from the US, and since at least at least World War II, the US has had just nothing but one war after another themselves. They're still going at it too, even as they go down to an extent. He also said if a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. So there you go. The Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, and survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. There would be nothing in this to offend the consciences of the devout or to restrain the ambitions of nationalists. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of that? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness. But he also means, too, really high-minded people like themselves are indifferent to the misery or the slaughter of other peoples. They find they're useless eaters. Think about it, folks. so indifferent to other people's happiness, especially to other people's. It says, however, I'm wondering from the question of stability, which I might return, or must return. There are three ways of securing society that shall be stable as regards population. The first is that of birth control, the second that of infanticide or really destructive wars, and the third that of general misery, except for a powerful minority. Well, I think they're using a combination of all of these right now, aren't they? It's rather obvious. So I'm just going through this again because it's time to do so, maybe. When you realise that infanticide too, and they've got post-birth abortion, and they've been killing babies as soon as they come out and gone to full term. It's all here. Everything was planned a long time ago, folks. And Bertrand Russell wasn't a solitary character with oddball ideas. He was part of the group put in charge of creating a post-World War II culture for Europe and a good part of the world. And he worked with the Frankfurt School, he worked with the Macy Group. They were given permission by the president at the time to literally create a whole new culture. It wasn't just creating a culture, it was, they actually worked out so precisely the different parts, like from here to here, right to the miniskirts even, to promoting sex. They call it free love, which they're trying back in the late 1800s, and then they tried it in the 1920s, roaring 20s in the miniskirt again in the Charleston dance, and then brought it back again in the 1960s, along with drugs and pop music, and then it became rock and roll. And the fallout of it, too many unwanted children. Well, let's help these poor girls out, and you end up getting an abortion. And of course, they give them the pill too, but there's nothing that's not worked out step by step. How do we get from here to there? You have to go from here to there to get to that second place you want to be. I mean, you might have 50 different things you have to do, to make it happen. And that's how they plan these things. And then once you get to a certain stage, then they bring back either the long dresses or they have pants for women, and then they alter even the attraction of sexes into what's wrong with this, what's wrong with that, until they change the whole idea of that, and marriage too, of course. So it's all planned that way long ago, and never for the reasons that you think. It's not so. What did you say? They're completely indifferent to folks' happiness, other people's happiness. It's not to make folk happy who you can marry or whatever. No, not at all. It's different agendas on the go, and we're living through a script, as I say, literally worked out a long time ago. Quite something. Now I want to touch on something too. It's an article that's quite good actually on why facts don't matter. It's kind of important. And this article here is, because I've said it so many times, it's good that folk are using the phrase now, because I've said facts don't matter anymore. And I've done poems about it too, I think, and facts don't matter. But it says, frustrated with COVID-19 restrictions on daily life, a friend said to me, I just want to know the truth. It's like that song, all I want is the truth, all I want. Who's it, Lennon sung that, or somebody sung that? Lennon's Day, all I want is the truth. Yeah. But this article is from, I can't see the whole name of it, but anyway, it's AIER, Financial, and it's quite a good, I have some good little topics to pick on. So why facts don't matter to people, right? So yeah, frustrated with COVID-19 restrictions on daily life, a friend said to me, I just want to know the truth. Like many people, my exasperated friend and others I know are mesmerized and frightened by daily news reports on the number of COVID-19 cases. You can cite all the data you want, and it gives links to such as these from the US. It's good news all around, but you turn on television and get a different message. And it's so true. You'll see if you go into facts, you'll see that the COVID thing was plummeting, even in April. And of course, but the media kept hyping it because they're told to. It's a big agenda. And Fauci would say one thing off the cuff, and then he would say a completely different thing on TV. So it says, but you turn on TV and you get a different message. People worry about sending their children to school this fall Because now they're trying to say, oh, children might get this too now. I mean, it's amazing how they keep adding to it, eh? to try to terrify folk to comply, especially aimed at mums, because mums will try to protect their children. And, like, our children might be at risk now. Oh, my goodness. Even though children aren't getting it pretty well at all. Doesn't matter. Again, facts don't matter. So some display authoritarian views as they execute politicians for destructive errors merely because they showed strong leadership. And it says, if you're wondering why so many people don't see the world the way you do, engage them in conversation. You find they're as well intentioned as you are, but they're looking in a different direction. Beneath their opinions and fears, beliefs are shaping how they see the world. Because of different beliefs, your villains may be the heroes. They may look at the world of effects while you're looking at causes. They're hoping a better leader comes to power while you're considering how the presidency became so powerful and destructive. Until their beliefs change, they will never consider how politicians and experts with too much power turned a pandemic into catastrophe. As Einstein put it, whether you observe a thing or not depends on the theory which you use. To look at it, basically. It's a theory which decides what can be observed. The clear guidance politicians claim to dispense, the truth my friends want to learn, are not rooted in the principles of human flourishing. My friend is waiting for a government official to blow the all-clear whistle. My friend doesn't want to believe experts are as fallible as he is. And that's true. They want to believe in experts. That's what, by the way, that's what also Russell said in the 50s. He says, we're training up the people to be unable to even comply with the basic thing for everyday living without the advice of an expert. He says eventually that they will be unable to think for themselves. They'll need experts. And we're here now, eh? So back to this article. And he says, my friend doesn't want to believe experts are as fallible as he is, and the prevailing scientific consensus may be false. For me to explain to him why defining risk as an exercise in power would bring a blank stare of disbelief. And then he goes on to a book called Without You, There Is No Us. It's in her book, Suki Kim tells the story of teaching English to elite all-male students at Pyongyang University of Science and Technology in North Korea. Kim, who was born and raised in Seoul, immigrated to America with her family when she was 13. Yet there were encounters over meals at university where some candor occurred. And then they go through different thoughts on the song of General Kim Jong-il, etc. And how literally the students believed that he was brilliant, that this leader was brilliant. And everything that happened he was all powerful. He was like a god, actually. You see, this is how they train you. And that's what Suki Kim realized, that how they're all trained like uniformly, and they all believed uniformly. There's no individuality at all, basically. That's what they're trying to say. And students did firmly believe lies, such as North Korea is the most powerful and prosperous nation on the planet. Well, Bertrand Russell said the same thing again, didn't he? He said that every country will tell them to live in the best nation in the world, and every country will tell them that they have the best healthcare system in the world, and yada yada. That's what he said, So all governments do that part. You see, they consistently lie too about the basic facts of their daily lives. Kim writes, lying and secrecy were all they had ever known. She asks, in a country where the government invents its own truth, how could they be expected to do otherwise? Now, that's a good little statement. A country where the government invents its own truth. We're living in a truth-fluid culture now, right? A country where they tell us new lies every other day, and literally they'll always deny they ever told you a lie, as they do it themselves. Anyway, it says Kim was at crossroads for further conversation with her students. Was the student a spy trying to trap her? Because they'll do that, by the way. Or even worse, would the student end up in the gulag for merely discussing the limits of power? And Kim responded, our country is not for the president, but for the people. The president is just the face, the symbol, but the real power belongs to the people, and the people make the decisions. When she was asked about that from a student, it says, if only what Kim said was true. Have you noticed how many Americans are thinking like North Koreans? They seem reassured and relieved when their favourite politicians behave like North Korean despots, issuing field guidance. When North Korean despot Kim Jong-un visits a factory or farm, he makes pronouncements for improvement. Such pronouncements are called field guidance or on-the-spot guidance. No matter how nonsensical, the pronouncements of the despot are revered and obeyed. In North Korea, there's no path forward that doesn't begin with 100% obedience. There's nothing to be discovered, only edicts to obey. To serve the despot is the only purpose of life for North Korea. Andrew Cuomo is a beloved politician, despite having issued field guidance sending thousands of nursing home residents to their deaths. Things are said so casually here, and you've got to understand that too, that this is an incredibly important thought here, and fact as well. Again, facts don't matter, but as the title says, but Cuomo, don't forget, he did put in infected patients in the nursing homes, and guaranteeing that it would spread like wildfire, and it did, and it added to the numbers of COVID deaths. And you have to say, well, no one is that stupid. It was intentional. It was intentional. It says even in May, after news of his disastrous nursing home orders were widely available, his approval rating was at 81%. This is after it happened. After it became known what he'd done. It just shows you, the beloved politician, you see. Today, voices in the opposition to the field guidance of politicians and experts are still being heard, but don't take this for granted. Tolerance for communicating opposing views is shrinking. Is it ever, Telling you. A March 2020 poll of Americans, and it's got a link to it too, with 3,000 respondents, showed strong bipartisan support for criminalizing speech. Now, a lot of polls are fake to start with, that's true. That was part of the reason polls were invented, was to sway public opinion, because folk will jump on the bandwagon. Well, if so many percent are all for this, then I should be for too. The majority thing, that's how it works. It's about 70% of those surveyed supported government restricting people's ability to say things deemed as misinformation. Nearly 80% endorsed the conscription of healthcare professionals. Government seizure of businesses and property was supported by 58%. Over 70% supported the detention of COVID-19 patients in government facilities. The majority of those surveyed did not change their opinion, even when told their views may violate the Constitution. And as I say, often the facts don't matter. It goes through other ones too. This is, well, I've all experienced the truth of John Kenneth Galbraith's famous observation, which was faced with a choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to. Almost everyone gets busy with the proof. Confirmation bias, they go into confirmation bias here too. This is, we embrace information that confirms our view, your present confirmation, while ignoring or rejecting information that casts doubts on it. So it's confirmation bias, etc. And again, there's always psychologists involved now, because we're so well studied, right? They know how we tick and what we think and how to make us think or make us want to do what they want us to do. Quite easy to do. Not a bad article though, I'll put that one up. And the path forward, that says it too, like Dr. Fauci, they believe the path forward is obedience. There you go. Obedience, folks, as they say. And it's a good article, actually, on it. Obedience. You remember, too, when you bring in chaos, and this is what you do with revolutions, the planned revolutions, that really are not meant for everybody, obviously, because you can see who gets promoted and pushed and who's going to be the victim and all. And no, this is really, and it's not just a retribution either, because most folk haven't done anything wrong to anybody else either. Most folk don't behave like that. So there's been a great lot of hate taught and fomented in the training of people over many years to attack other people. So there's no doubt about it. That's standard stuff. You can do it within a homogenous society too, by just creating political factions or religious factions and encourage them to hate each other, and then elevating one to slaughter the other ones, and justifying why they did it. This is old stuff, you know. Or you can use the ethnic groups against the others and elevate another above another, etc., etc. And that's what you're seeing at the moment. This is old stuff, as I say. Plato talked about it too when he was talking about different kinds of governance, and he talked about what we would call communism. It comes in after democracy, when democracy becomes stale and stagnant and bloated and corrupt. Then you find that the next step is generally communism, a form of communism, they would call it in translation, which is a totalitarian system again, you see. And you obey and do what you're told, and it's not fair at all. There's many wonderful, nice-sounding phrases about equality, but really nothing fair in it at all, as George Orwell talked about it in Animal Farm and etc. But that's the system you get, and then to sort it out, because it ends up in chaos and stagnation, where nothing's efficient, everything falls apart out of incredible corruption, and the Soviet Union did the same to an extent too. Then in comes what they call the fascist type system to clear up the mess and get it back on track. You see the same thing in ancient Rome, and it was built into their particular laws in Rome, where generals would literally have to step in and become tyrants. Tyrant wasn't just a nasty word; it was an essential role at times when their own Senate was so corrupt. They were putting farmers out of business, the farmers that fed you, and then taking over the land for resorts for themselves, for holiday places and so on. Total corruption, and would come a general generally to restore order and get the place, the country fed again, etc., and back on track. So that's how it's done. And nothing really changes with that, except the people who follow revolutions are being used. The ones who foment today and lead them are generally paid awfully handsomely by outside source, and they're well trained. They're forms of mercenaries, actually, some of them, but well trained for the powers and organizers, etc. So there you go on that part there too. Now, this article here it's quite a good article about, and it's from Global Research. I know that Global Research really is run by a kind of higher Marxism too, but they've done awfully good articles. You've got to hand it to them for putting out articles and being fair in some sense too. And it's maybe surprising to many that's coming out from this source, but they've got into colour revolutions in pretty good depth in the past. And this article is about CIA-backed colour revolutions, the dishonest career of the remarkable Serda Popovic, and that was by William Engdahl. And it says most folk have never really heard the name of this operator called Serda Popovic, but he and his organization called, and this is one I've mentioned before in previous weeks, called Canvas, C-A-N-V-A-S, have played a lead role in almost every CIA-backed colour revolution since he led the toppling of Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic in 2000, at least 50 according to the last count. Revolutions across the world, Don't forget the CIA are the ones at the above it all, mind you. It says now he has turned his sights on Hungary and Hungary's popular and defiant Prime Minister Viktor Orban. That was in 2017. And on September the 8th, a professional regime change specialist, Serda Popovic, came to Budapest and joined with the anti-Orban opposition groups in front of the Hungarian parliament. It's clear that Popovic was not in town to promote his Hungarian book on non-violent regime change, that's what they called it, but rather to give aid to anti-Orban parties before Hungarian elections in the spring of 2018. And this is because of the manufactured aura of hip doer of good deeds surrounding the personality of Serda Popovic. It's useful to look closely at who sponsored his remarkable career since he founded a tiny Belgrade student opposition NGO, non-governmental organization called
Pori, it's called, in 1998 with its now famous clenched fist logo. The career of Sirda, Povic, from 2000 till today, suggests a remarkable dishonest manipulator in the service of foreign intelligence agencies and governments, despite his vehement claims otherwise. Now, I just want to mention too, before I go right into this one, I'm sure it's the same group that put out the same characters to run or to interfere with the globalist meetings, anti-globalist meetings that were peaceful at the time. And as in a newspaper, different newspapers at the time of it happening, in the late 90s and early 2000 onwards, the globalist meetings took part in North America, some of them anyway, and that massive opposition to them, because it was really to do with free trade. The guise of free trade was for us, our countries, to sponsor big corporations to move to China and the Far East for cheap labor. And through these agreements we'd lose less national sovereignty, and our standard of living would go down. We all knew that at the time. It was well discussed and well promulgated amongst academics at the time, those involved in globalism and what it was all about. But we remember too that they start to get these guys dressed in black, you see, with a mask on too, who suddenly appeared and would start throwing Molotov cocktails at police cars during these peaceful demonstrations to try and get the whole thing. And it didn't encourage the rest of them to riot. What it did was make the folk turn against them and made the authorities almost go out with the riot squads, which it seems is what they wanted to happen. But some of the newspapers put articles out eventually tracing it back to one of these nations, you see. And they found a training center for particular radicals who would go into countries and overthrow them. They would use the mass populism, basically, of protesters against different organizations. They would use that. They would jump, just like the Bolshevik Revolution technique, they would piggyback on their back and then try and guide them into mass rioting for their own causes. Then they would take the lead, you see. That's how the Bolsheviks took it over. The Bolsheviks needed masses to take over Russia. And that's what you do. So they jump on a legitimate reason or demonstration or protest, and you subvert it for your own causes, you see. But this article here is talking about the fact that these are color revolutions. The most famous organization for toppling governments in this day and age is the CIA. It used to be MI6, and there was a name before it for the Secret Service and so on for Britain. But the US took that over long ago, that role. Just off the cuff before I get into it too, is that there's a movie was put out with one of the James Bond characters, Pierce Brosnan, in a movie called No Escape. And I don't know when it was done, but I don't know if it was supposed to be in Thailand or where it was, but it was some over that area bordering Vietnam. And it's about really a nation or a country or even an island where an American corporation or British corporation, American-British, had literally gone into the nation, just like that character who talked about, I was an economic hitman. It's that kind of technique, and that agents in the country that would encourage the politicians and buy them off and so on. So give them little loans to get water distribution and systems set up and things like that, and energy, and knowing they couldn't repay them because it'd make sure things would happen that would detract from the payments by causing disasters or whatever it happened to be. And then they would take over the island and have the whole island in debt until they owned the resources of the island or the country. And that's what the movie's about. And Pierce Brosnan was one of the agents. It's quite interesting how he explained it hurriedly to a guy who had no idea. He and his family got caught in this revolution without nothing to do with them. And he says, we started all this. We wanted the resources and so on, and this is how we did it. We got them into debt, and we helped them out by encouraging them to set up systems of energy and resources and and water systems, and we'd end up owning it all, and then they couldn't pay it, so the interest on it, so then we'd take over the country, and that's literally that's the old system. But it's quite a good movie, actually, in that kind of respect, to show you how it's done and why folk get awfully fed up and take up arms to kick the foreigners out. That's how it happens. But yeah, that's where we are with these colour revolutions. They're not just spontaneous. The folk who follow anything are the useful idiots, to call them. I hate to say it. And you think you've got high-minded philosophical ideas and moral ideas, but you're all being used. And you won't know that to maybe a year or two or a few years down the road. But the way things are going with this thing, with the slowdown, with the COVID thing, it works perfectly well with revolution and into total austerity and rationing and lockdowns, permanent lockdowns under this socialist system as they bring it in. I've noticed that some countries already are locking you down with a passport. That your passport isn't just your not vaccinations; it's your complete passport to even for your own community, and you won't be allowed outside your community. They've already tried that in some of the Far Eastern areas. This is all planned out long before this all happened, folks. You know. So this goes in again. This article, back to it. How Popovic first gave international notice as the founder of the Belgrade student political activist organization Otpor, which means resistance in Serbian. And then it says it was soon to change the student grievances. He and other Otpor founders then were trained in the methods of U.S. regime change specialist Gene Sharp, who's founder of the Albert Einstein Institute. Awfully important organization, this is. Albert Einstein Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and by U.S. State Department soft coup specialists such as Belgrade Ambassador Richard Miles and other trained U.S. intelligence operatives, including election specialists and public relations image makers. You're starting to get a picture here how it works. Guiding Otpor's Milosevic ouster operation, U.S. Ambassador to Serbia Richard Miles was a specialist in regime change, the CIA, right? Far more so than in classical diplomacy. He orchestrated the CIA coup in Azerbaijan that brought Aliyev to power in 1993 before arriving in Belgrade, and after that he went on to orchestrate the CIA coup in Georgia that brought U.S. asset Michael Saakashvili to power. The U.S. Agency for International Development, that's the big one who spreads the funding, USAID, widely known as a CIA front, had channeled the Serb Otpor millions of dollars in funds through commercial contractors and through the U.S. government-financed NGOs. The National Endowment for Democracy, NED, N-E-D, this is all these are all branches and specialized branches in this cluster of the CIA, the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute. The Open Society Institute of George Soros was also funneling money into Popovic's Otpor for the toppling of Milosevic. As I've yet to find a CIA and US State Department regime change or colour revolution in which the democracy-building foundations of Soros were not a kind of harmony with the Washington State Department and CIA agenda. And isn't that the truth, eh? So they all work together, right? The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Some people have been in touch with me who worked for it, by the way. And that's how they get into the CIA on some of them. It's almost like an apprenticeship into one of these organizations. But the USAID's a well-known one. They pick up the process of helping them across the world, helping people. And they start to catch on how it works through funding and then manipulation of the funds into demanding money back or demanding policy changes within the countries in exchange for aid, etc., until you change the whole culture, maybe, etc., and the system. So USAID, well known as a CIA front, channeled the Serb Otpor millions of dollars, right, in funds through commercial contractors and through the U.S. government finance. Remember that one? It was supposedly blown up in north of Syria, an American contractor, and then they blamed the Iranian troops that were working with the Syrian government. And so they eventually killed a general, an Iranian general in retribution. Remember that? Well, get back, think about it. See, the guy that they killed, supposedly, that this general, which they claimed, I doubt the general was behind it, it was a sporadic thing, with the contractor in in Syria who was working for the US government. It's CIA we're talking about here again. So that's what they do. National Endowment for Democracy, NED, National Democratic Institute, NDI, and the International Republican Institute, IRI, the Open Society Institute of George Soros, and the toppling of blah blah, and many other ones, by the way. They're all part of the Colour Revolution, and of course the media is all on board with it too, right? It says the NED with its affiliates was a project of Ronald Reagan's CIA head Bill Casey in the early 1980s to conceal CIA regime change operations around the world behind the front of a private democracy NGO, the NED. Alan Weinstein, co-founder of the NED, admitted to the Washington Post, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA." See? So these are really, they're disguised assets, as they call them, but they're still CIA. Well, that's not the CIA now. No, it's NED, we call it. and it's US aid and blah, 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 you see. According to Michael Dobbs, who was foreign investigative reporter for the Washington Post during the Milosevic ouster, the IRI paid for Popovic and some 24 other Otpor leaders to attend a training seminar on non-violent resistance at the Hilton Hotel in Budapest in October 1999. There, Popovic and the other hand-picked Serbian students received training in such matters as how to organize a strike and how to communicate with symbols. Such as a clenched fist that became their logo. They learned how to overcome fear and how to undermine the authority of a dictatorial regime. The principal lecturer at the secret Hilton Hotel meeting was Gene Sharp's associate, retired U.S. Army Colonel Robert Helvey, former Defense Intelligence Agency analyst who trained and then used Otpor activists to distribute 70,000 copies of a manual on non-violent resistance in Serb translation. Helvey worked with the Gene Sharp, founder of the controversial Albert Einstein Institution, teaching techniques to the U.S. government to conceal its coups d'etats under the guise of non-violence. Sharp was described by Helvey as a Clausewitz of the non-violence movement, a reference to the renowned Prussian military strategist. Mind you, they always have what they call a passive wing or non-violent wing. This is you find in communism always have that too, and then you'd have their advanced one. They're hard. The IRA had it too, mind you. They have their Sinn Féin leader, and then they'd have the active IRA, you see, the real physical stuff. And you find organizations inside the US, in fact, still have the same organizations. Some of them were actually terrorist organizations in the 60s and 70s. They're now advising the FBI. Quite amazing, isn't it? So Popovic and his Otpor NGO recipients of a major share of over $41 million US government money for their democracy-building campaign in Serbia. Dobbs describes the US involvement, says behind the seemingly spontaneity of the street uprisings that forced Milosevic to respect the results of a hotly contested presidential election on September 24th was a carefully researched strategy to put together by Serbian democracy activists with active assistance of Western advisors and pollsters. US-funded consultants played a crucial role behind the scenes in virtually every facet of the anti-drive, running tracking polls, training thousands of opposition activists, and helping to organize a vitally important parallel vote count. US taxpayers paid for 5,000 cans of spray paint used by student activists to scrawl anti-Milosevic graffiti on walls across Serbia. In short, Popovic began his revolution-making career as a regime change specialist in an operation funded by the CIA, the US State Department, US government NGOs, including the infamous NED, and the Open Society Institute. The question is, what did Sada Popovic do after his first helpful service to Washington in year 2000. Then they go into, after that, what happened? What did he do, right? After getting rid of Milosevic for the US, Popovic created a new organization called Canvas. He decided to globalize his business model that worked so well in Belgrade in 2000 to make himself an international go-to person for making US State Department fake democracy regime change. What do you think's happening in the States right now, eh? Canvas, or Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, calls itself a non-profit, non-governmental educational institution based on the use of non-violent conflict. According to Wikipedia, Canvas seeks to re-educate pro-democracy activists around the world in what it regards as the universal principles for success in non-violent struggle. It says they claim that at least 50% of their obviously substantial funding for this philanthropic work, right, philanthropist really, comes from Popovic, or his ally called Slobodan Dinovic, co-chair of Canvas and listed as CEO of something called Orion Telecom in Belgrade. Standard & Poor's Bloomberg Business Research reveals no information about Orion Telecom, other than the fact it is wholly owned by an Amsterdam-listed holding called Greenhouse Telecommunications Holdings, BV, where the only information given is that the same Slobodan Dinovic is CEO in a holding described only as providing alternative communication services in the Balkans. And it goes on and on. It says, leaving aside unconvincingly statement by Povic's Canvas that half their funds comes from Dinovic's selfless generosity from his fabulous success as Telecom CEO in Serbia, that leaves the other roughly 50% of Canvas funds unaccounted for, as Popovic declines to reveal his sources beyond claiming they're all private and non-government. Of course, the Washington NGO is legally private, though its funds mainly come from the US aid. Of course, the Soros Open Society Foundations are private. Could these be some of the private patrons of his Canvas? We don't know, as he refuses to disclose any legally auditable way. And it goes on and on and on. And how they've been used, they've been used in the Ukraine, in Georgia, Zimbabwe, Burma. Actually, the legal name since independence from the British is Myanmar, but Washington insists on the colonial. Ukraine, Georgia, Eritrea, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Tunisia, Egypt, and Syria. Popovic's Canvas was involved as well in unsuccessful attempts to start color revolution, regime change against Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, and the opposition in the failed 2009 Iran Green Revolution. Busy, aren't they? Very busy characters, he is. And it goes on to the Goldman Sachs and Stratfor. This is important too for folk who have heard the name Stratfor. Never mind Goldman Sachs. Even more interesting details recently came to light on the intimate link between the US intelligence consultancy Stratfor, known as the Shadow CIA for its corporate clients, which include Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and US government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and the Defense Intelligence Agency. It was revealed in a huge release of internal memos from Stratfor in 2012, some 5 million emails provided them by the hacker community Anonymous, that Popovic, after creating Canvas, also cultivated very close relations with Stratfor. According to Stratfor International emails, Popovic worked for Stratfor to spy on opposition groups. Revealed in the same Stratfor emails by WikiLeaks was intriguing information that one of the Golden Geese funders of the mysterious Canvas was a Wall Street bank named Goldman Sachs. Sutter Munir, a Goldman Sachs partner, is cited by Stratfor's then Eurasia analyst Marco Papic. Papic asked by a Stratfor colleague whether Munir was a golden goose money behind the Canvas, and he writes back, "They have several golden gooses. I believe he is for sure one of them." Good article though, and it goes into this in pretty good detail. They put the disclaimer in at the end that they're not responsible for any inaccuracies that they don't know about and so on. But to me, it's a good starting point for a lot of people who don't understand how intelligence agencies actually work. They're involved in everything. I hope you understand that. You've got to get out of this idea that the CIA, for example, and MI6 in Britain, that have worked together, since World War II and then onwards, are there to protect their countries. Nothing is further from the truth. They have completely global agendas and completely different agendas for every facet of society, cultural, everything to do with society, economic, you name it, your societies. Literally, I mean, if they want you to walk backwards for some strange reason, they'll make you do it, and you'll go along with it. It might take them 20 years to get the money together and to finance it and force it in and train us all. But eventually they'll get you there. Look at all the other things you've accepted without, think about it, folks. Telling you. But it's not a bad article to give you a starter and a lot of these things. They've been happening in your lifetimes. And folk get little bits and pieces of, and it'll ring bells with them. But they forget the main stories that happened during all of this. We've been living through overthrows our entire lives by organizations like the CIA. And the CIA is it's a global project, folks. Another article here is to do with the Federal Reserve. The latest data shows that household wealth in America dropped by $6.5 trillion from the end of 2019 to 2020. As the coronavirus pandemic started to take its toll, all of this loss came from a sharp drop in stock prices, no kidding, and happened before average Americans saw unemployment soar to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Taking other data on how average Americans have been doing since March 2020 suggests that the real pain to household wealth has only begun. And it goes on to give you more financial information and so on. But believe you me, I mean, what's coming down the pike has been managed for their complete austerity sustainability program. That's a fact, folks. They can take that to the bank, and it's planned this way. There's no doubt in my mind that the whole Fauci, CDC, WHO organization, this whole COVID thing, is really the big pusher of the whole world agenda right now, along with the supposed spontaneous, Black Lives Matter, Antifa action that's going on right now. It's all working together. It's planned before all this, and just wait for the spike to make it happen. That's how they work it. And bingo, there you go. And Cultural Revolution now, or a new Lenin statue is erected as Washington and Jefferson and more fall, it says here. So a statue of Bolshevik communist despot Vladimir Lenin has been erected in Germany as statues of the Washington, Jefferson and other historic figures are torn down in the US, the UK and wider West. Lenin, who was born of Vladimir Ulyanov, was inaugural leader of what later became the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, or Soviet Union, after his Bolshevik faction failed to win a democratic majority and the All-Russian Constituent Assembly became out on top in the brutal civil war which they plunged the Russian Empire into in 1917. Despite posing as a champion of national and ethnic minorities and their right to self-determination in the early period of his revolution, factions which attempted to govern themselves autonomously in Ukraine were ruthlessly crushed, and he later invaded neighbouring countries such as Azerbaijan, Georgia and Poland. Nevertheless, the long-dead foreign dictator is being honoured in Germany, city of Gelsenkirchen, with a statue in a 1950s relic of the former Soviet vassal state of Czechoslovakia. Even the statues of historic Westerners are being torn down across the world amid the now global Black Lives Matter unrest. It says here too that the time for monuments to racists, anti-Semites, fascists, anti-communists and other relics of the past has clearly passed, declared Marxist-Leninist Party of Germany, MLPD, chairwoman Gabby Fechner in a triumphant statement. Lenin was an ahead of his time thinker of world historical importance, an early fighter for freedom and democracy, she claimed. So the new monument stands beside a large MLPD billboard, which alongside a stylized image of Lenin's face declares, "Give anti-communists no chance." I wonder who's paying her. But yeah, it's just astonishing. We're living through this kind of stuff. And so I've said it before, whatever works for the elite at the time, they'll use the system. If it's fascist, they'll be fascist. If it's Nazi, they'll use it Nazi. And if it's communist, they'll use communists and call it socialist if it sounds better, softer. But whatever is very fast to get parts of the agenda through, they'll use them because they're totalitarian. They don't care about democracy. It's too slow, isn't it? Having to ask folk, what do they think about this before they make laws? Come on. It's more efficient when you have a totalitarian government, eh? A new bill, can you believe it or not, aims to help Scotland to keep pace with European Union laws after Brexit, it says here. Constitution Secretary Mike Russell said in a new bill at Holyrood, it will mean that on devolved matters, Scottish law can keep in line with those in Europe when appropriate and practical to do so. So it says that the UK withdrawal from the European Union, Continuity of Scotland Bill will provide for continuity of provisions that would otherwise be lost with Brexit. And Scotland literally is a vassal now of the EU, just like Ireland is too. So they got their let's fight for our freedom to end up with a bigger vassal, get a bigger master than the one that already run you. What a joke! But what can you say? Train spotting indeed. Also in Scotland, with all the Black Lives Matter and all the rest of it, and they had massive demonstrations. A little old Scotland, a tiny population, the whole thing. And it says, here's one here, 1 American among 3 killed in UK terrorist stabbing. And it says the 25-year-old man was arrested after police believe he acted alone, stabbing victims in a public park on Saturday. This is so common now in Britain. And 7 p.m. local time Saturday at Forbury Gardens in Reading, England, leaving 3 dead and 3 others injured, according to the Thames Valley Police. They arrested a 25-year-old man suspected of murder, as the case was soon declared a terrorist attack. Before that, too, a little girl was killed in a park in London as well. She was about 8 years old or something like that. It was very young anyway. Very similar to by a possible terrorist as well. Another article too, Glasgow, says Shafiq Mohammed, who runs, here you go, asylum seekers housing project, right, for refugees in the city of Glasgow, and knows residents placed in the park they're using hotels to house them, said the company had created a toxic environment where people are clearly going to be affected, squeezing hundreds of people, mostly young men you see they're bringing in, mainly with mental health issues. Many with mental health issues. Why are so many of them going to have mental health issues? And also there's others, I guess, meaning from their war-torn areas, who have post-traumatic stress disorder. They bring them into hotels and cooping them up with nothing to do for 3 months was a recipe for disaster, he argued. Is that really the problem? It's big business for some organisation. Big business, big money, you know. There's folk getting rich on this kind of thing. In Ireland too, I know that as well. One charity worker in Glasgow who didn't want to speak on the record told The Independent they had heard from residents in the Park Inn that the suspect in knife attack had already been the subject of complaints over his aggressive and erratic behaviour. But despite evidence of mental health problems, little action was taken. According to the BBC, the suspect had told another resident in the hotel he planned to hurt people the day before he launched his sudden stabbing spree. I want to attack them, they're against me, they hate, an eyewitness reported the man saying. Some of the residents came from countries in conflict with each other, Mr. Mohammed said. while others were offered food which was culturally inappropriate, he'd been told. I tell you, it's something else, eh? Anyway, 6 folk got stabbed. I don't know if anyone had died yet. A cop was also stabbed in there too, and eventually they sent the police in. And they went in and shot the guy. I guess it was just no other way around it. So, yeah. Of course, they won't classify it probably as... That's the in thing. They never classify them now as terrorists. They always mention that they're just mentally disturbed. They're all told to say the same thing across the world now. Right? This is interesting too. It says Mears' handling of the lockdown had earlier come under scrutiny after an asylum seeker died in a Glasgow hotel in May. Mr. Mohammed said it seemed to him the firm was driven primarily by turning a profit out of housing vulnerable people. Big money though, It'd be another NGO group, We're here to help them and made so many millions per month of dollars or pounds. Again, is what you're seeing, as I've mentioned before, with Rockefeller and his ilk of the CIA and CFR, etc. You can't make omelets without breaking eggs, and these folk who get stabbed and killed and all that are just like collateral damage. Like the rest of them across the world, same thing. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. There you go. That's the eggshells. There you go. All the fallout of these constant wars across the Middle East and elsewhere, eh? And it's the same characters that are changing the world inside your countries. You see, they give you the wars. Here's an article here. Iran, the next domino, ? Revolutions are often seen as spontaneous. It looks like people just went into the street, but it's a result of months or years of preparation. It is very boring until you reach a certain point where you can organize mass demonstrations or strikes. If it's carefully planned, by the time they start, everything is over in a matter of weeks. And that's said by Ivan Marovic, ex-instructor, Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, Serbia. Right? That's the Canvas again, same group I mentioned earlier. With the staging of a second attempt at a green revolution in Iran in the wake of the overthrow of the regimes in Tunisia and Egypt by groups primarily sponsored by the National Endowment for Democracy, International Republican Institute, Open Society Institute, Freedom House, USAID, and a myriad of their fronts, the question might arise as to whether the turmoil inflicted on Egypt and Tunisia was intended as a prelude to the major target, Iran. Iraq, Iran, and Syria were targeted years ago as priorities for regime change. Again, that was the group that was put up by the PNACs in the 1990s. This is the now well-known letter addressed to President George W. Bush by the Project for a New American Century should be recounted. PNAC outlined a plan of action that was put into effect, starting with the elimination of Saddam Hussein. Iran and Syria were next marked for elimination under the pretext of the war on terrorism. I've done all this stuff before. I don't know who wrote this one here, but... And it said that we believe that administration should demand that Iran and Syria immediately cease all military, financial, and political support for Hezbollah and its operations. Should Iran and Syria refuse to comply, the administration should consider appropriate measures of retaliation against those known state sponsors of terrorism. And it's among the numerous political and foreign policy luminaries who are signatories to the PNAC letter was Frank Gaffney, who is stated below is on the advisory board of the Foundation for Democracy in Iran. America's post-Cold War doctrine for world hegemony was outlined in a comprehensive PNAC document called Rebuilding America's Defenses. Post-Cold War warriors outlined their plan for a new Cold War or clash of civilizations that involves not only Islam but all regimes, cultures, religions, traditions, and ideologies that do not fit into a new American century. Is it starting to make sense? Say that little bit again. It's said so quickly and simply and easily. The post-Cold War warriors, the post-Cold warriors outlined their plan for a new Cold War or clash of civilizations that involves not only Islam but all regimes, cultures, All, we're part of all, don't you understand? All regimes, cultures, religions, traditions, and ideologies that do not fit into a new American century. So it'll be a different America. But it's for the whole world, including America. Having led the West to victory in the Cold War, America faces an opportunity and a challenge. Does the United States have the vision to build upon the achievement of past decades? Does the United States have the resolve to shape a new century favorable to American principles and interests? And on it goes, It repeats a lot of the stuff I mentioned before from the Global Research article too, about the different organizations that work and do regime change, and who funds them: NED, NED, Soros, IRI, etc. And they did the same thing in Egypt too when they elected their president, remember? And the West wasn't happy. They kept saying, well, it's not secular enough. So they wanted to be an atheistic guy, because then you can buy them off. It's much easier to buy them off when they're atheistic, you see. It says Soros' Open Society Institute funds the Arabic Network for Human Rights, it's called. And all the other organizations, they help overthrow these countries. Wonderful signing for human rights, you understand, you know. And it goes into U.S. Embassy supports and approves of the funding of 6 proposals submitted by Iranian contracts in the UK that involves those taking part in workshops at Durham University. It just shows you how you can't keep up with this kind of stuff, folks. You really can't. That's why even intelligence agencies, they're different foreign sections, you see, different countries, and each country is subdivided into all special areas and parts and so on, because one person really has to deal with this one area of each particular part of it, and couldn't even cope with it all. There's so much manipulation going on. It's just and money getting funneled all over the place, and quite amazing. That's how the world really works. Yeah, I'll put this link up as well for those that want to see that one. Now, I'm going to touch on an article by Peter Hitchens that was out on the 14th of June, and it's pertinent, very pertinent as to what's happening now. He mentions, as the left now controls every lever of power, we face nothing less than regime change. That's why these strange crowds have begun to gather around ancient and forgotten monuments, demanding their removal and destruction. They do not know what they want or understand what they are destroying, but that no longer matters. They think their moment has come, and they may well be right. This is why the memorial to Winston Churchill and the cenotaph itself were shamefully boarded up Thursday night as an act of appeasement, if ever there truly was one. That's why the police chiefs kneel like conquered slaves to the new gods of woke, and the leaders of the Labour Party do likewise. I've seen it happen before, but only when things were moving in the opposite direction. And Peter Hitchens saw the toppling and the fall, or the dissolution of the Soviet system. It says, then as the Soviet Empire fell and an evil thing was swept from the world, it was a matter for rejoicing. Well, here they are, I just interject here, but here they are, we're trying to re-establish the same thing because it's going to suit the same elite that runs us now. Because it'd be a faster way to get things done, totalitarian. And back to the article, the bloody mass murderer Vladimir Lenin, the one they're putting the new statues up for, and his equally gory secret police enforcer Felix Dzerzhinsky. And Dzerzhinsky was something else. Dzerzhinsky, he said that he gave a very I can't go into too much depth for different reasons, but Dzerzhinsky despised the common people, absolutely hated them. These characters who ran this equal system, equality and brotherhood and all that of Sovietization, communism, hated the average people. And Dzerzhinsky, he says, people, he says, he says you can beat them, you can starve them, you can do all kinds of terrible things to them. He says, Did they turn round and fight you? You know, it says no. They'll just turn round and eat each other. You know, they won't fight back. He's getting the fact that they won't fight back. You see, that attitude was put into the movie called Fight Club, actually, where they show you in a kind of comic way how they'd soak passerbys with water sprays and hoses and anything to get them riled up to try to retaliate. And most folk won't do it. They'll argue and they might shout a bit, but they don't physically back it up, you see. But Jasinski, that's what he said. You know, he says, yeah, you can starve them to death, you can beat them, and will they fight back? No, they'll just eat their dead, you know. These are the great leaders. Anyway, so he was a secret police enforcer, and were pulled from their pedestals by people sick of being ruled by their heirs. That's what happened before they pulled them off their statue, off their boards, off their foundations. The boarding up of Winston Churchill's statue, Parliament Square, was an act of appeasement, if ever there truly was one. And the monument to the wartime Prime Minister now stands heavily bordered to deter possible attacks of vandalism from protesters in the coming weeks. This time as ignorant armies seek the final abolition of Britain, it is very frightening. I would not like to say where it will end. I cannot claim to have known this would happen, but I will say, and this is important because I think a lot of us had this, I will say that I had an instinctive fear of very bad things to come when the country began its mad, wild shutdown in March. It all goes together. As I've learned from over many years to trust my instincts, to take that train, to make that phone call, to turn that corner. When I have heeded them, I have either benefited or been saved from bad things. When I've ignored them, I have been hurt. It may be inherited from our forebears or learned by decades of experience. It may be a mixture of the two. But on crucial occasions, we know more than we think we do. And as cities began to darken and empty, and the world, as we knew it, started to close, I feared we should never again see the lights lit again as they had been before. It was like the start of a great war without limit. Made more perplexing because there was no obvious end to it ever. And that's what you were told. Oil was never going to go away. It's going to keep coming back, keep coming back. We can't go back to life as it was before yada Fauci, you know. It says this was not just about a disease and a wholly overdone response to it. It was like the death of Princess Diana and the fall of the Twin Towers gathered together into a single great mass of unreason and panic. And it says the Diana episode had been a dictatorship of grief. And it's true, it was a big managed event in which even the most revered parts of the establishment had bowed to the mob, such as "Show as you care," shouted the headlines, and woe betide those who did not. Then came September 11, 2001, and a dictatorship of security. No argument could withstand the claim that safety was paramount, and we willingly made a bonfire of our freedoms, wrongly persuaded that we could trust our governments not to take advantage. And now we have the dictatorship of fear. It's not the largely fictional number which governs the behaviour of our feeble government, which is only just beginning to grasp how much damage is done, how hard it will be to repair. It's a terrible number, the number of people scared into pathetic timidity by the slick but false claim we were all at risk from a terrible and devastating disease. The number of the dead are grossly inflated by an incredibly lax recording system which does not distinguish between those who died of COVID-19 and those who died of other things but may have been infected by it. Many who have died of COVID-19 are almost certainly victims of the government's failure to protect those who are in fact most vulnerable, the residents of care homes. The cenotaph too was boarded, as signs now point to Britain facing mass regime change. The sad but unavoidable fact is that the disease is little danger to most young and healthy people, but especially deadly to the old and ill, and is also now beyond dispute. This is a fact. Again, facts don't matter. The initial claims of Imperial College London that 500,000 might die if a strict shutdown measures wasn't taken have been devastatingly dismantled by other experts who believe its methods and codes are, to put it mildly, hopelessly wrong. Yet Imperial Chief Spokesman Professor Neil Ferguson, caught ignoring his own advice about a girlfriend, has a double nerve to claim the rules he flouted should have been introduced even earlier. There's just psychopaths talking. Eh? By contrast, Sunetra Gupta, Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford, says that the shutdown should be lifted immediately. Thanks to the barefaced dishonesty and unlawful bias of the BBC, and also the pitifully bad coverage of several newspapers, millions are unaware the whole basis of government policy is now completely exploited by scientific experts. Getting back to that article by Bertrand Russell, how you would be unable to do anything without the advice of an expert. Even the truth about Sweden, which did not shut down, is obscured by incessant hostile reporting. Sweden followed Britain in one thing, failing to protect the care homes, the old folks' homes, and so has had a higher death toll than it should have done. But even so, its experience, along with Japan, shows clearly there's no link between shutdown and the number of deaths suffered. So you can stay open, you see. The ceaseless assumptions of government and BBC that the shutdown be protected the NHS is simply not borne out by the facts. The NHS is never going to be overwhelmed. COVID deaths in the country peaked April the 8th, an event far too soon to have been caused by the shutdown announced on March 23rd and begun the following day. And isn't that the truth? In fact, the country with the highest number of deaths per head is Belgium, 843 people per million. Yet Belgium introduced one of the tightest and most severe shutdowns on the planet. Sweden, without a shutdown at all, has suffered 472 deaths per million. So it goes on and on and on. But yeah, you're seeing a revolution, and this is part of it, including it's a revolution, and Fauci's part of it too, folks, and the WHO, World Health Organization, it's all part of the same revolution. Sustainability, too many folk, blah, blah. Can't go on again, can't open up again without permission, and you have to look into your books to see if you pollute at all, you see, because if you pollute in any way at all in your business, then it's unsustainable, and you can't open up again. That's the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum, etc., etc., right? But anyway, he goes on and on and on, and he talks about Minneapolis, and he says, which is true, isn't it? I mean, you see this across the whole planet, and he doesn't believe either that a spark in America caused it, basically. As it happens, it was the death in Minneapolis, the city most British people will never ever see, or even see, of George Floyd. Seeing the surging crowds, the rioting and the looting in the USA, the British radical left grew jealous. They imported the protest, converted it into outrage against some smouldering statues, and set the streets alight. Last week, I attended one of these demonstrations against the statue of Cecil Rhodes in Oxford. I've lived in Oxford for more than 50 years and I went out of interest, not because I care especially about this mediocre sculpture of a questionable man. The event was utterly incoherent, moving from vague rage against the long dead roads to concerns about the oppression of West Papua New Guinea to shouts against colonialism. As far as I know, China is the only major colonial power left. Peking is certainly raping Africa on a scale Cecil Rhodes never dreamed of. But such people can't quite bring themselves to attack that particular regime. Sometimes I think the radical left are more nostalgic for the British Empire than any retired Indian Army colonel ever was. He's making a little dig there, of course, at the fact that they never complain about Peking expanding all over the planet, China. He says, so the writers need to hate it, the British Empire. Its utter deadness is a nuisance to them. I became briefly famous because when the crowd was invited to sit down for 8 minutes and 40 seconds with fists clenched to commemorate Mr. Floyd, I did not join in. One of the protesters accused me of refusing to take the knee. It's true I would have refused to do so if asked, but in fact they were taking the buttock, a slightly different thing. This is the important thing about these protesters, lauded by the Labour Party and deferred to by police chiefs, as they help to strengthen the new establishment and destroy the old one. They've already helped to make it very hard for traditional, normal, Christian, conservative and patriotic opinions to be expressed at all. By using social media as a platform of discipline that made everyone, including the left-wing multimillionaire author J.K. Rowling, fear them. Anyone, as she learned last week, can now be cancelled this new radical chilling word for the obliteration they like to visit on their victims. You're cancelled. What does that tell you? You're cancelled, eh? It's like you're terminated. What does that mean, eh? What does that mean, eh? She's been pursued for saying the wrong thing about the transgender issue. In fact, there's no right thing. I have known for years. There is no right thing, yeah. I've known for years that it was futile to try to respond with fairness and reason to the new orthodoxy. So he said, even if he had argued back, in other words, he said, I would still be denounced for thought crime. You cannot be right, nor can you know if you're right. That's a large part of the trick. No actual debate can take place in these conditions. Where there's no debate, there's no freedom. I've also pointed out for years without effect that the police were long ago infiltrated with radical left-wing thought. They're also indoctrinated in it through their schooling before they get to be a policeman or woman, and they're indoctrinated through their training as well into it, of course, yeah. So he goes on about Cressida Dick. He warned that in 2004, noticing her early experiments in negotiating with demonstrators rather than reclaiming the streets from them, and predicting that she would be the first female Metropolitan Police Commissioner, which eventually she was. Pointing out that Labour's Smoothie, Mendelsohn and Blairite, and Tony Blair's Eurocommunists, and they were, by the way, Tony Blair, the guy who brought Britain into the damn wars across the Middle East too. It's always left-wing, it does it, eh? It said they were far more dangerous than Jeremy Corbyn's crude and obvious Marxism. So there you go, and he goes on and on about other things. It's quite a good article, actually, and it spells it out, and it's rather sad because he doesn't see, and I agree with him, I can't see optimism in this thing at all myself, because it's so well, what you're up against is massive intelligence. I mean, some intelligence agencies have multiple thousands of employees and multiple thousands of specialists in all areas of societies. How can you combat that? And when the elite want what they want, they get what they want. They'll use any system or ism that they want that'll suit them at the time if it's more efficient at the time, then destroy it. Also an article, Black Lives Matter leader threatens to burn the country down. That was on, I think, Fox News. Someone sent me a clip of it, but I've got a transcript of it. And that's what he said. That was Newsom, I think it was. So if this country doesn't give us what we want, we will burn down the system and replace it. All right, and I could be speaking figuratively, I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation, Newsom said. We want to argue that historically violence is the way his community has been able to get results. I tell you, it's quite amazing. A lot of cops have been killed too, by the way. And they're rapidly taken down. There are little clips of it happening. There's also a guy trying to get through the crowd with his vehicle. He's a disabled vet as well in the States, and a guy who was one of these protesting or rioting. I know she was protesting and rioting. He was a white guy. As the van went past, he shot through the back window and shot the guy in the head. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. And there's a lot of rather insane folk on the fringes that are used, by the way, are the ones who go all the way with it. They think that it's their world now, and they have no idea that after these things are over, even if those who have used them get what they want, which is a much higher authority than the ones you'll see, they then eliminate the ones who are on the fringes. They've served their purpose, because now they're dangerous if they don't get what they want, you see. They're utopia. There's another deadly shooting near George Floyd protest as looting and arson grips Minneapolis, another article here. And I mentioned before about Glasgow, the stabbings, and activists warn of toxic environment inside the hotels used to house asylum seekers, etc., etc. 6 folk, this one person stabbed, and I don't know if any of them are dead yet. Another thing too, the folk have had enough everywhere of the lockdown, you know that. So, and that's why isn't it amazing how it all went silent about COVID when all the protests and the rioting too was happening. It all went silent because it just stopped. It was a very politicized virus, you know. And I guess it was just told to stop for a while, you know. And then out comes Fauci again as soon as, oh my God, it's spiking. Like, no, they're doing more and more tests like crazy. And the more tests you do, the more you're going to find out the folk that have had it. That's called herd immunity. Viruses sweep through all of society. There's no way you avoid it. So folk are getting out to the coast in England. Major incident declared as people flock to England's south coast. And they're on the beaches and so on. And some of them have had enough. And of course, the health minister in Britain is Matt Hancock, the guy who let it slip that 10,000 folk die a month in Britain normally, at any time of the year. And then you tally up the numbers, then you say, my God, there you go. So anyway, Matt Hancock, this time the health secretary, said on talk radio that he had the power to close beaches if the people did not respect social distancing rules, he says. Even though it's all a farce, the whole thing. It was based on nothing, the social distancing. He says, I said that girl whose daddy was trying to make her famous so she can get into Harvard or somewhere by helping her with the computer program that's decided that, oh yeah, 6 feet's the best way distance to be. Based on nothing else except the computer. This article is so true. It's so true as well. And lots of articles have bits and pieces of truth, and some can't go far enough. Some don't know to go far enough, and that's the way it is. And when there's so many agencies involved in the riots and the fomenting of world revolution to suit the elite, the reset, they call it, to the WEF. Anyway, everywhere statues are torn down by the mob, history promises people are next. The promise of bloodshed coming alongside or following shortly after is an historic certainty. The symbols of a people never satisfy. People themselves must always come next. And it says, for millennia, King Mob, the mob itself, right, has targeted society's icons with varied goals and to varied ends, and a few things are more foreboding than his desecration of civic art, just as the targets have ranged from rulers to clergy, from tyrants to helpless, and from the guilty to the innocent. The outcomes have ranged from victory to defeat, depending on the society's strength and will. The promise of bloodshed coming alongside or following shortly after, however, is an historic certainty. The symbols of a people never satisfy. People themselves must always come next. In 1790s, mobs looted and pillaged Paris's treasured Notre Dame. To the revolutionaries, the cathedral symbolized everything that was wrong with France's history and society. A history of kings, tradition and religion, a society beset by royal injustice and systemic inequality. Over the next 3 years, the 12th century's churches, riches and artifacts were stripped, stolen, destroyed, the remnants hidden by the faithful and sold off by the faithless. Statues of the Virgin Mary were removed and statues of the Goddess of Liberty took their place on desecrated altars. At nearby Sainte-Chapelle, the revolution pulled the apostles from the pedestals where they had stood watch over Christ's crown of thorns. The 12 statues were vandalized and buried half so badly they're still undergoing attempts at restoration. As a destruction of religious art unfurled, priests who did not swear allegiance to the new order and those who aided them were sentenced to death. That happened too in the Soviet Union, folks. And even during the Spanish war, civil war, they did the same thing then there as well, nuns as well. It's always the same agenda. Eh? Back at the cathedral, the revolutionary government mistook the 28 statues of the kings of ancient Judah for French kings, rich old men and all, dragging them into the public square for decapitation. Their buried heads were not rediscovered for nearly 200 years. The place de Louis XV, the large statue of the square's namesake, was torn down. The plaza renamed Place de Révolution. Guillotine was raised, and liberated space would see the execution of more than 1,200 prisoners, from King Louis XVI and his wife to the execution's ringleader himself, Maximilien Robespierre. 1,700 years before, Pliny the Younger described Emperor Domitian's golden statues rudely battered down and made a sacrifice to public joy amid his toppling and assassination. It was a sport and pastime to humble those statues, exalted heads to make them prostrate and kiss the ground, to maul them with hammers, to hew them with hatchets, as if every stroke blood and pain had been to follow. None was so moderate in the venting of his rapture, none so sober in his overflowing joys, but that he thought it a lustrous piece of revenge to see their mangled limbs, their dissevered joints, and finally their grim and ghastly images, divested of all their borrowed majesty, and thrown into the flames to be melted down into better use and service. Then it goes on to the US, starting with 2017, with a statue of an unnamed Confederate soldier, and it escalating to Confederate officers and General Robert E. Lee, etc., etc. And yeah, they've even had hangings of statues again in the States as well. Same old stuff, eh? And then destroying statues depicting Christ as light-skinned, so you can't have that either, or a form of white supremacy. Tear them down, race-baiting activist Sean King wrote Monday afternoon, and it gives the link for it too. That goes on and on and on. Policemen and reporters have been attacked, while mayors and journalists have defended the riots as mostly peaceful. When an historic church across from the White House was set ablaze, his leader welcomed the mob and decried the president. She was joined in her outreach by Washington's Catholic Archbishop, and the mayor named the street after the mob. And so the mayor's street is now called the Autonomous Zone. And again, they're given the chance now that's really to do with what's coming next. It says here that apart from the mobs victimizing and terrorizing small business owners and attacking an awful lot, and we actually see little clips of them. Does anybody here know what happened to the people who did not get on board with the French Revolution? A member of the mob shouted into a megaphone a week prior. Chopped, the mob chanted as violent response. My head's chopped, eh? These are the times that make you want to walk away from society. It's just too well managed and too well understood how to get lots of useful idiots, to call them. We're all useful idiots if we join any kind of mob, even if you think you're standing up for the right thing at the time. Those who have cunning at the top, they're true psychopaths. They have wealth, power, and cunning. They could run rings around you for schemes that you'd never even catch on to their schemes before it's so late. It's just instantaneous with them. They're born schemers. That's how they do it. Another article, 7 shot in 4 separate incidents overnight in Peoria. It just goes on and on and on. Eh? First one was a 20-year-old woman who was shot in the leg, etc. And people shooting at cars and then running off. It's just a bit of mayhem. You see more and more mayhem. A lot of shootings in New York City itself. Now that the cops aren't responding to all the calls anymore because they know if they maybe do their job, and it'll maybe cause another riot. So why bother when your own government is not going to back you up? And your own officials in your states won't back you up. So no one's going to be foolish enough to risk themselves doing their job and then getting a mob coming down to lynch them. So you have lawlessness for a while. And it will escalate too. To show you too how literally racist everything is. Don't look for logic in anything. It's supposed to. The mob will be fed and fed and fed by their leaders as long as they're useful. But you don't even need logic in it. It's a Newsweek magazine, right? Oregon County exempts non-white people from mandatory face mask order. So it's Lincoln County. So if you're not white, you don't have to wear a mask. Because wearing a mask is to counter racial profiling, they say. So last week, health officials declared face coverings would be required in public settings where individuals may come within, again, this silly 6 feet that little schoolgirl came up with in a computer, 6 feet of someone outside their household after the county saw a spike in coronavirus cases. On Tuesday, the county said people of colour who have heightened concerns about racial profiling and harassment due to wearing face coverings in public will be exempt from the order. I think the only other exemption was children under 12 years of age or those with medical conditions. Everything's politicized. Even the virus itself is politicized, eh? Quite amazing, isn't it? And also, 2 dead, 12 injured in shooting at North Carolina block party. I don't know if any cops even turned up. I don't know. It isn't safe to turn up to do your job. It depends who's doing the shooting. If you do injure someone who's elevated at the moment, well, it's liable. You'll be crucified yourself or by your own government, eh? So why would you risk it? Now, as all this is going on, I've always mentioned this before in the past, when major things were happening, like 9/11 and various other things that would happen. Even the big flooding went on in New Orleans some years back too. Yeah, I always say, when you see the agendas of the elite, the published agendas, like their 2030 program and so on, and that wasn't on the go just as far as it was actually on the go, but under just the Agenda 21, but the different parts of the future all planned out, staked out. When the governments themselves were making new plans, way beyond the catastrophes or financial meltdowns, it tells you that nothing stops the plans, nothing stops the planning or the plans, regardless of what you think. Your world might be in upheaval if you lost all your money during the last bank, I hate to call it crash because it was a planned thing in the first place. But for those at the top, nothing stopped. There was no halt. There was no slowdown in the churning out of the agendas for the future. And that's what we've got today as well, isn't it? You've got the appearance on TV, I guess. I get little clips sent to me because I don't watch TV. And I can't watch many of the clips because my speed is so... I get really punished for what I do. My speed goes way down. And the thing is, you're living through something where you would think that they'd put certain things on hold. There was a slowdown here and a slowdown as the impression of cities burning. That's what they put out there, is on television, I suppose, and on the news all the time. And again, the financial chaos and trillions been dished out, supposedly borrowed money, but it's borrowed from nothing. But you have to pay it back with real goods and real physical, tangible some things. That's how this corrupt system works. But nothing slows down, eh? Non-traveller digital identity, advancing secure and seamless travel. I mentioned this last week. Remember, I mentioned it too, that Wendy Mesler had a show in the 1990s in Canada, and she did one of them on the preferred pass or something. It was like you're authorized as a pass. You get fast pass through airports and so on if you go through the whole digital and biometric programming system on a new biometric passport, basically. And you'd be a preferred type customer, you see. You always get that little snob appeal if you're goody-goody to get folk into it. And she went through the techniques they used, iris scans, thumbprints, all the rest of the stuff. But here you are, and it's the same thing. A known traveller, it shows you how far ahead they planned things, right? From the 90s, here's 20-odd years later. Known traveller digital identity, advancing secure and seamless travel. And it's from the World Economic Forum, naturally, right? This other unelected massive monstrosity. And it says, shaping the future of mobility platform. And it's going to develop a pilot decentralized digital identity platform which leverages fourth industrial revolution technologies. You love that fourth industrial to help government. You understand that's sort of 5G and everything, massive interrelated technology, to help government and industry leaders facilitate seamless and more secure international travel. It's going to be not just international folks, together with a community of travel security experts, all of that word experts, the new priests say, and white coats and so on, policymakers, businesses and international organizations. The project will achieve this by piloting the KTDI concept in a cross-border context. In collaboration with a consortium comprised of the Government of Canada and the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Accenture, airlines, airports and technology providers, the former is currently piloting components of the KTDI concept in a real-life cross-border context. So it'll advance safer travel in the face of COVID-19 impacts. Hey, there you go. Look to the computer and technology for all electors, for anything to do with diseases now. You know, they'll tell you how many is going to die. Millions, says Ferguson. And things, and again, how far apart to be from someone, which is 6 feet, according to the computer that girl used, their daddy from the military-industrial complex helped her with. Dear God predicts that the computer, it's so scientific, don't even try to understand it, you lowly little human, you see. So advancing safer travel in the face of COVID-19, there you go. So it's got biometrics again, blockchain and digital identity. It's now more crucial than ever. The forum will facilitate multi-stakeholder dialogue to gather insights and develop actionable strategies to promote more secure travel through improved border and health screening, touchless passenger processes, and more effective use of data. Heavens, data, eh? But yeah, you would have a passport, all right, for even to go outside your own community for any length of time. This is an interesting article because, and it's great for conspiracy theory. Everything that's happening is great for conspiracy theory, right? Here in the middle of supposedly a massive killer pandemic, you get the same people in charge of some of the US states suddenly stopping the COVID thing, joining protesters in the streets, shoulder to shoulder, and then going back to trying to lock you down again. It's astonishing, really. But you see that happening. Then you see this complete lack of the backing of authorities in the US to back up police or National Guard, or anybody actually, that would try and get law and order restored. There's absolutely no backing whatsoever that I can find anywhere. Little comments from Trump is not law, it's not executive order, it's just little comments. And what you get too is some of the generals, I mentioned it last week's talk, some of the generals are definitely on the payrolls of big corporations from the military-industrial boys. They're really lobbyists for them. So I'm not surprised with some of them saying they wouldn't back Trump basically with his policies on how to deal with this chaos, isn't it? But and folk in the States are left to try and defend themselves. That's what it comes down to. Don't look to government to help you when government backs off of its responsibilities or of its oaths of office. That's what happens. But in Canada, apparently, that a lot of Canadians have been disarmed, at least by, I don't know if it's all firearms or what it is actually, but it's to do with that shooting I mentioned before, just briefly, in Nova Scotia, of a man who, I think they said he was a dental hygienist, the guys who make the dentures, I suppose. But he had 2 police cars, or they'd bought an auction, used police cars, and he was dressed like one when he went out on a shooting spree. It made no sense to anybody how it was put across, but that the government jumped on it right away and tried to and pushed forward laws to just ban stacks of firearms across Canada. At this time, with COVID and riots and folk threatening certain other members of society at the moment, they're disarming people. So think about that. I mean, is this all coincidence? Is it at the same time as this happening? But here's it was interesting, it struck me odd at the time. with the guy with the ex-police cars. Families of 22 victims killed in Nova Scotia shooting demand swift federal inquiry amid speculation a gunman was an undercover agent for the RCMP or had ties to organised crime. Well, often you'll have both, folks. It could be CSIS as well. It could even be CIA, because we have CIA members operating inside Canada as well. So Gabriel Wortman is a man apparently who murdered 22 people during a rampage in Nova Scotia in April. More than 2 months later, the victim's family is still seeking answers to why he carried out the attack and why it took so long for the RCMP to stop him. The Nova Scotia Attorney General Mark Fury repeatedly promised that a federal and provincial inquiry will be announced soon. A potential break in the case came last week when, this is important here, when video allegedly showed Wortman, this is the guy who did the shootings, withdrawing, listen, you have to listen very carefully, $475,000 from a Brinks office days before the shooting. The Brinks, as far as I know, they don't have banks. They have security and safety things for big, wealthy organizations or corporations and so on, right? So he withdrew $475,000 from a Brinks office days before the shooting. Then they have video of him in there where they have the boxes, they have the boxes and the money in it and so on. And as his police sources say, the withdrawal matched the method that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police use to send money to confidential informants and agents. The RCMP has repeatedly insisted it has no special relationship with Wortman, who was killed by police following the attack. Others speculated that the money could have come from Wortman's alleged ties to organised crime. Authorities are said to be investigating his relationship with people linked to a Mexican cartel called La Familia and to the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. And this is from the Daily Mail, by the way, and it said here that he launched a deadly rampage across several small towns in Nova Scotia on the night of April 18th, lighting fires, and shooting people at whim with 4 unlicensed semi-automatic weapons as he drove around in a replica police cruiser. I think he bought them at auction. I think I'd read that somewhere else, maybe true or not, but ever it'll be, you must have painted them up or something, or else they were already painted if he'd bought them used. For 13 hours he evaded capture of the RCMP before he was shot dead in a confrontation with Mounties at a gas station in Enfield, 60 miles from where the rampage began in his hometown of Portapique. By the end of the spree, Wortman had claimed the lives of 22 people, 13 who died from bullets and 9 who died in the fires. More than 2 months later, the victim's family is still seeking answers as to why he carried out the attack, why it took so long for the RCMP to stop him. So Maclean's magazine, unearthed a video which allegedly showed Wortman withdrawing the $475,000 from a Brinks office 19 days before the shooting. And that's how the method that the RCMP use to send money to confidential informants, agents, and would not have been possible for a regular citizen to do. So it definitely seemed to be working for something. If it was the RCMP, was it CSIS? Was it which agency would it have been? Interesting. So it says, while compelling, the latest theories have done little to placate the victims' loved ones naturally, who demand to hear concrete facts. And the amount of information being kept from us is deplorable. Most of what is known about the shootings were released in the days after it occurred, with little information released since then. Really don't know as to why he went totally on the rampage. It's just everything's so secretive in Canada when these things begin, these inquiries. But definitely there's something stinks when it comes to going into the Brinks place. The average citizen can't get into Brinks and withdrawing $475,000 in cash. So it's all on video anyway. So it'll probably stay in limbo forever, because in Canada you just don't get much information at all. Also, I've mentioned before from the WEF, World Economic Forum, when they say that now is the time for the Great Reset. And these are you already understand the terminology you're hearing as well. It's a reset not just of financial economic systems, but of ways of living. It's the whole agenda, folks, and a lot of topics that to be put out to the public about regarding even having children or even having the right to have children, yada yada yada. The new society. Interesting terms they're using the WEF, like reimagining the future. You find Bill Gates saying reimagining education when he worked out or his company has apps for all the different educating at home or through centralized computer systems with teachers on the other end somewhere. Reimagining, everything's reinventing and reimagining. This is all planned this way. This conformity of language that they're all in with, all using, and agreed to use the same terms on everything. Obviously, And says that the COVID-19 lockdowns may be gradually easing, but anxiety about the world's social and economic prospects is only intensifying. Good reason to worry. A sharp economic downturn has already begun. No kidding you. What happens when you lock down the country and there's no work, eh? And lots of small businesses are out of business altogether now. They're gone. I mean, small businesses, maybe a couple running businesses and so on, depended on that money coming through. They have their own bills to pay off and probably their own debts as well for the company and for themselves. And when it stops, well, that's it. Won't come back again. And it says, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic requires global cooperation among governments, international organizations, and the business community. Yeah, well, not the small business, just the big ones. They'll get bailed out. And it says the platform is created with the support of the World Health Organization and is open to all business industry groups as well as other stakeholders aiming to integrate and inform joint action, it says, for unprecedented global health emergency, etc., etc. Yeah. Well, none of us asked for the WEF to do it all, and we don't vote for them anyway, but they seem to run our lives because those who run it all at the very top of the WEF are the world's ultra-wealthy elite. They are the ones, eh? It's quite something, eh? But they've got it all worked out, and again, the Rockefeller Foundation is churning out stuff that you wouldn't believe. But in reality, they're just taking them off the shelves, these scrolls, and dusting them off, because the plans were made years ago for all the things that are happening today. That's how things happen, eh? They pretend it's spontaneous. We're dealing with it on the spot in real time. Sure they are, yeah. Tell you. Quite some, isn't it? But I'll put these articles up for those who want to. And the great mobility again, the program and coalition is awfully important. How they're going to have the Global New Mobility Coalition, GNMC, by the WEF. Active, diverse community of over 150 globally renowned experts. All these experts. Where is this big place where they churn out these experts, eh? These high priests that rule our lives now. If it rains, it could be raining today, you should all go outside with umbrellas. No kidding, eh? Or they have oilskins on the TV. They used to have oilskins on. Dumb things like that to tell you that you can't think for yourself, eh? Okay. Or it's going to be warm the day. Don't overdress because you might overheat and have sunstroke. Okay. And if you do feel yourself getting too hot, take something off. That's why you need these experts. That's why they get paid such big money. And some folk are going to say to me, Alan, some folk need them. I don't know. And it's true. I can remember many years ago when I used to watch TV, they had a program just on safety and interviewed different people who manufactured things like step ladders, and they had to cover them with different warnings about don't stand on this edge of it just by itself. Don't stand on 1 foot if you've gone above the top rung and you're trying to paint a ceiling or something. Don't do this, don't do that. Because there's so many idiots that will do it. You see? And you expect that. You will always get the folk that will do it. But they'll sue, you see. Here's the thing, too. Oh, some lawyer will get hold of, well, we can sue them, you know. They didn't have enough stickers to warn you. And that happens. But, so yeah, I mean, I guess some folk need the experts to tell them what to do and what not to. But that's not everybody, let's be honest. That's the minority who really can't think for themselves. Or they truly believe that they should always get an expert to tell them everything they do. Everything. You know. But anyway, that's the New Mobility Coalition. I'll put that up for those who want to live in healthier cities, you see. Again, this is to do with accelerating the shift to shared electric and autonomous mobility. I've mentioned it before. So you can share cars. You're not going to have so much cars running around. They want you to get rid of the gasoline engine, as you know. That's again Agenda 21 anyway. And we're on our way. We're on our way with all of this stuff. Another one too. Again, there's no scientific evidence to support the disastrous 2-meter rule. I've been through this before. And here's another one saying the same thing. Queuing outside shops, dodging each other ones inside, and not getting too close to other people anywhere. Social distancing has become the norm. Isn't that astonishing? Something that was a complete made-up thing with a girl and her dad in the computer. The 2-meter rule, however, is also seriously impacting schools, pubs, restaurants, and our ability to go about our daily lives. The government is reviewing the policy, but what evidence is there that keeping their distance makes any difference to catching COVID? Even the Lancet said it, and it's in here too. The review provided evidence from 150 studies in support of physical distancing of 1 meter or more. This might sound impressive, but all the studies were retrospective and suffer from biases that undermine reliability of their findings. But I know that some of the top, virologists have come out and said that, half that would be fine. Half the 6 feet would be fine, so you're down to 1 meter and even less. It's just completely bogus, folks. And hey, that would be a miracle indeed if a virus goes as a straight line out your mouth, poof, and stops at 6 feet. Where did this bogus voodoo come from? Not in nature, believe you me. It doesn't exist in nature. Yeah, that's quite. It really is something, isn't it? But facts don't matter. Facts don't matter. I keep reminding myself about that too. Emergency room visits for heart attack, stroke, and high blood sugar levels fall by nearly 20%. Doesn't mean that folk will read that and so I think, oh, well, it's good. It's fallen. There's not so many visits. I guess it's better. As Americans are scared of catching COVID, that's the reason. It's not because they're not having heart attacks and strokes and stuff. They're scared to go to the hospitals, you see. And that's from the CDC, which they knew too, since they couldn't get in anyway. They closed most of these things down. And folk were dying, and even ambulance drivers weren't even taking them to hospital at times, so that's been in the papers as well. So how many folk have been really killed by the fact they can't get treatment for things which they could have been treated for? It's disgusting what's happened here. You have pretty well empty hospitals at times, but there's nobody in the ER or anything else to take care of people who are really sick. So the visits for the heart attacks fell by 23%, for strokes fell by 20%, and for uncontrolled high blood pressure, sugar levels decreased by 10%. Or how many folk died here? Yeah. And for hyperglycemic evidence, the largest decline was seen amongst the 18 to 44 age group, which fell by 12%. And so these are life-threatening conditions that they declined because the folk couldn't get in the hospital. Never mind all the other elective surgeries and cancer treatments. If you had a tumour and they spotted it in its early phases, and it was like a singular tumour, and those things, once they start spreading, those things spread by the hour. Once they start spreading, and you could have wiped them out on time individually. But here's the first one. Here's the primary one. But they couldn't get in for treatments, right? So by the time they're called in, it's spread all over them. This is a death sentence, folks. What's been happening with this big farce, this con, is just astonishing. And the hospitals were anything but overrun. in most places, most cities and towns. Terrible, absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. And it doesn't give you a follow-up on how many of the poor folk died with this, because they couldn't get treatment. Terrible. So there you go. Now, just to make you cheer up, and it's true. You got to cheer up once. You can't live in gloom and doom, Even that's all you're getting fed right now. But don't you look up to scientists that they're going to rule your lives and manage it. It saves all that heavy thinking stuff, of worrying. Scientists are going to make sure they can manage your lives for you, and through computerization and monitoring and spying on you, they'll be able to keep you perfectly safe, and maybe even wrap you in cotton wool in case you fall and hurt yourself. And maybe they'll get a program that'll predict when you're going to fall, right? And stuff like that. Well, just take care of you, because obviously you can't take care of yourselves. Right? But it makes you feel so wonderful when something breaks out that terrifies the whole planet. And then they tell you it comes, and let's be honest, come on, they said it was within distance of the Wuhan lab. And we know that Fauci and the rest of them had given certain viruses, coronavirus, to the Wuhan lab, and yada, yada, yada. So that's what terrified people. But science really is on your side, no matter what you think. I mean, that atom bomb thing and all the ones they let loose at the Bikini Islands years ago that spread radiation around the world, except those were just, they were just little fads that they went through. That's just fleeting fads, you see. So we should just forget that and think of all the positive things that science has given you. So let's be like a totally surveilled society, spied and so on. Genetically modified mosquitoes could be released in Florida and Texas beginning this summer. Silver bullet or jumping the gun, it says. Isn't that amazing, that, eh? And I had touched on this one before, but it says this summer, for the first time, the genetically modified mosquitoes could be released in the US. That's not the first time at all. On May the 1st, 2020, the company Oxitec received experimental use permit from the US Environmental Protection Agency to release millions of GM mosquitoes labeled by Oxitec as OX5034. I think I mentioned that last week. But does it make you feel better that forget about viruses that might be man-made in laboratory, and just concentrate on the good things that's coming, like these mosquitoes that are modified as well, And it says, well, these lab-bred GM males are released and mate with wild females. The female offsprings die, it says. Continual large-scale releases of these GM males could eventually cause the temporary collapse of a wild population. So there you go. And genetic engineering for disease control. That's why they're doing it, understand? They're going to create genetic things that can carry diseases to control disease, for disease control. And these mosquitoes that can't spread disease are examples of how genetic engineering may transform the natural world. Isn't that wonderful, eh? It says, new advances in genetic decoding and gene editing emerge with speed and enthusiasm. The ecological systems they could alter remain enormously complex and understudied. So, it's correct. You're living in Frankenstein's world, eh? And you're taught that it's wonderful, it's great and the whole thing. But I know they had dengue fever in Florida for years, and I think some of the things were released there at one time, trying to do away with that. And Bill Gates is into all that stuff as well, of course, with his different funding to help humanity. Doesn't mention it with this one, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was, because there's very little he doesn't have his finger in. Or there's very few pies he doesn't have his finger in. Maybe none of them, actually. But that's what we're living through. Genetically engineered mosquitoes. Don't forget that's the oldest modification. Before they were just modifying and interbreeding different types to get big, heavy mosquitoes for loading doses, for transmitting diseases for the war industry. But here, these ones here are going to help you. There you go. Maybe when you hear that bzzz coming towards you, and you've been in the military, you say, halt, friend or foe. You see? Find out what it is. Is it a friendly mosquito or normal, or a modified one, that's rather nasty. Yeah. And you'll be even more shocked if it answers you. So I mentioned that one last week anyway, and you can go into it's longer than I read here, because it goes into the side effects and maybe problems to do with genetic engineering, and the fact that folk might have bad reactions when they get stung and bitten by these mosquitoes, because you can get prophylactic shock because of it's a different type of mosquito, you see. Just little things like that, for the greater good. There's always got to be sacrifices for the greater good. Government wants to ban the cast choir from singing, right? When musicals return to the West End in London, says Lord Lloyd Webber, because of fears that it spreads coronavirus. I guess they can mime, eh? I guess just do what they used to do with the groups in Britain on Top of the Pops. They could get on there and just mime quite safely, because they're not forcing their breath all over the place, you see. The composer reveals he has talks with the Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden. And so Webber says he's unimpressed with the current government advice. Theatres have been closed since the coronavirus lockdown began in March. And amazing how you can go into a supermarket, but you can't go into a theatre. But it's a special virus, though. It's a 6 feet thing as well, It's just... So Lloyd Webber revealed his plans to test hygiene technologies needed to bring back this... What do you mean hygiene technologies? To be showcased in the first week of... Maybe they could attach certain things like ultraviolet to the mouths of the singers, so that when they sung out and the breath came out and all that, it would sterilise any viruses in the molecules of water vapour, from the breath. I should have said that. Someone will get a patent on it right away, Yeah, there you go. Even though I think they had something similar to that in the original Star Trek series. I think it was the one too, where that woman, she was a princess, and it was being transported for a marriage. She was not willing either to go for the marriage. They would cement the friendship of two planets that were always at war with each other. That's what it was. And some of them, you'll see them with this little thing around their necks. They were kind of blue faces they had, but and two not pointed ears, like they almost had like almost like two proboscis on top of their heads as well as ears, but they were blue faces, and they had this little thing around their neck that gave up a vapour in front of their mouths and noses. Maybe they could come out with something like that, eh? And you could sing cats and you could hear it gurgling at certain points, gurgle, gurgle, this water vapour stuff. Just a thought, So anyway, he revealed he was not impressed with some of the safety provisions, blah, blah, blah. And the government has advised the theatres to ban singing when the musicals return. It says, one of the things that's brilliant for musicals, he says, which is that you're not allowed to sing. He was referring to singing on stage specifically. I guess we can sing in the bath, perhaps, eh? Experts have warned us. Well, maybe that's what they should all do, is they should all go into their cubicles in their bathrooms and just amplify it onto the stage when they're singing, and that'll be safe then, eh? Experts have warned that singing is particularly dangerous in terms of spreading the coronavirus. Experts again, eh? I wonder what kind of experts they are, these ones. These are singing experts, eh? Or maybe they're aerodynamic ones, that they can tell the patterns of the viruses. But if they're singing on stage and they're 6 feet away from the folk, what's the danger, eh? And the folk in the audience are way more than 6 feet away, for goodness sakes. Or is it all voodoo and magic anyway? Well, of course it is. And you don't need an expert to tell you that. So Lothar Wieler, the head of Germany's RK1 Diseases Institute, says the droplets can fly particularly far when singing, he says. I guess he gets paid a lot to come up with this kind of stuff. because he's an expert, you see. It says several states in Germany have banned choir singing in church services, even as shops and restaurants have opened. Speaking on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, Lord Webber, I guess he's both now, said it's already been proven that theatres can reopen safely in South Korea. Yep. That doesn't matter. Facts don't matter now. And it says, believed to be the only large-scale English language production in the world, the show's world tour has been attracting large audiences to the capital's 1,600-seat theatre. I guess it's is it the Phantom of the Opera, or what's he running here? Phantom of the Opera, yeah. The show is a mandatory 3-week break in April after an outbreak of COVID-19 among staff, but has since run without problem. There you go. But there you go, that's how dumb it's all getting and how silly. But it'll get a lot sillier than this. Everything's silly, isn't it? Even demonstrations across the planet. Huh? And you're thinking this all to do with one person being killed in America? Come on here, eh? And then that part dies down. Then you've got other groups wanting to riot and to go further for a communist revolution. They openly say that. I don't know. It's pretty nasty and pretty silly as we go through chaos into the mouth of madness. Eh? Maybe even from the mouth of madness. Now I'll tell you too, I'm not finished yet, mind you. I should remind you again, before you forget, because folk will forget very quickly, to go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com website and make a list. Always do this, make a list and save the list of all the official sites I have listed on the cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. These are my official sites. Anything happens, remember, you can always go in there and go to the comms site on the Sundays and download the talk, because there's different things that can happen occasionally, and we have problems, and especially now with the COVID and everything else going on, and the slowing down of internet and different things like that. So if you get problems or anything getting pulled from other outlets, you can always come back to the source, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, or one of my other sites listed on that one. Remember too, you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and how to do it is also on the site. And you can donate to me and help me tick along here, because believe you me, it's a lot of work to put the stuff together, and it's widely used by other folk who make their living on it. But it's not lucrative by any means at all. I don't sell t-shirts, I don't sell anything except just what I've mentioned, books, discs, and when I give out there lots of information, because we're living through an incredible time. This is history. I've said that from the beginning. This is history in the making. And it's the kind of thing that if you have grandchildren one day, they'll turn you and ask you what happened back in so-and-so. And what are you going to say to them? Oh, we just had a disease, and then someone got killed, and there was massive riots. And then, is that what you're going to say to them? Or are you going to have the facts there? Because you have to know that the truth all must go down through time, by a few at least. Truth, that's how it comes. That's how at the present time some of us know. Not everyone passes it on, but there's always occasionally the little groups of people down through time keep a hold of the facts and the truth, not just the official records, which are always skewed, but the things as they actually happen. As I say, it's so important too, as I said earlier, that I hear from people with their own observations on things. Is awfully important. Nobody's exempt. No one's unimportant, because you're living through it. Real history. You're experiencing the real history. And don't let it go to waste and disappear to be left with official ridiculous books. Just stick to getting your own facts across there, and send them to me if you. And lots of folk do, as I say, keep in touch with me. It's awfully important they do. And others can get in touch for the first time even, and let me know how they're doing and what they're seeing across the world, because that is history. What's happening now is history. So again, donate to me, and you can see how to do it at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. It's very much appreciated and utterly necessary. This is not to buy me second cars or something, even though my old John Chris book kaput. And and my house certainly does need repair, even basic repairs. But what I do is not, it's never been for the money, or I've done something else, believe you me, I could have quite easily. So cuttingthroughthematrix.com and send me a few bucks. Now, this one here too, coronavirus. This is a good example of the world, really. The UK needs to borrow more than £400 billion, actually. £400 billion over 2 years. And the International Monetary Fund warns it as it abandons hope of V-shaped recovery, it says here. Well, that's the whole idea. Don't forget the Royal Institute for International Affairs, that was simply the group called the Lord Alfred Milner Group and Round Table Society, that ran the British and set up the British Empire, really took it over at least and really pushed it further, became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the private group, which also has its American branches, CFR, etc. They also set up the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations eventually. They set up that too. Everything is anything they set up, and it's all, they run it all. It's one group of private banks, believe you me. So the UK needs to borrow more than £400 billion over the next 2 years. The International Monetary Fund warns as it abandons hope of V-shaped. Now the IMF, International Monetary Fund, that's like the collection agency for the World Bank, you see. And they come into a country when you can't afford to pay back, and they slash all your social programs to the bone to make sure they can get their paybacks, you see. That's how it works. So they bring in austerity. So there's Britain definitely on the road to austerity, and they're totally way over their heads in massive debt. But so is every other country because of this COVID nonsense. And this is the UK debt now larger than the size of the whole economy. This is another article here too. And its debt is now worth more than its economy after the government borrowed a record amount in May, £55.2 billion. Figure was 9 times higher than in May last year, and the highest since records began in 1993. The borrowing splurge sent total government debt surging to £1.95 trillion, exceeding the size of the economy for the first time in more than 50 years. And listen to this nonsense. The best way to restore our public finances is to a more sustainable footing, is to safely reopen our economy so people can return to work. I guess some genius said that, eh? Huh? We've set out an action plan to do this in a gradual and safe fashion, including reopening high streets across the... Why go through this farce when you've had massive protests across the country that ignored all this lockdowns and everything else? Come on here. Huh? So income tax, it says income from tax, national insurance and value-added tax all dived in May amid the coronavirus lockdown as spending on support measures soared. A lot of money is going to big pockets too, mind you. And the same in the US and Canada, elsewhere. That's corruption runs their systems, right? David Cameron, the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, who was really... left-wing, even though it's supposed to be pretending he was right-wing, says the World Health Organization failed in its coronavirus response by being too slow to react and too worried about upsetting China, as he calls for a new international pandemic force. So they're all so here's an ex-Prime Minister. He calls for a new international pandemic force on behalf of the same masters, eh? And the ex-PM called for the World Health Organization's current pandemic role to be given to a new body. Said it was too worried about worrying China and too slow to warn the world. And here's the G20 to discuss new global virus surveillance organization. There you go. In November. And this is the current system fails in 2 ways. The WHO relies on countries telling it about emerging viruses. Then the world relies on the WHO telling everyone else. He wrote an article in the Times, but countries are often reluctant to share for reasons of politics, pride and capacity, and the WHO seems slow to react, mostly for the same reasons. The WHO is totally complicit with China and with Fauci and all the other characters that work with the biolabs folks. I mean, and Bill Gates, they massively funded. That all came out to how a good portion of his cash comes from Bill Gates. Now he owns it now. It's further left than Karl Marx was, the whole organization, the United Nations and the WHO. Here's the thing, here's something that really, really matters too, with all this tracking and tracing and signing up for this and signing up for that. And you have to get your tracking bracelets if you don't get a car. If you've not got a cell phone, you see with the right app on it, etc. Not on the list. You're not coming in. Drinkers might have to register online before visiting pubs when they reopen on July the 4th, says Matt Hancock in Britain. Well, you might have to register, eh? So it says, it confirms that options are being considered as ways to make it safe to reopen the hospitality industry. Mr. Hancock insists that the government is on plan to get more sectors of the economy up and running by July 4. They make clear there's little chance of bars and restaurants getting back to business as usual anytime soon. Asked on Sky News' Sophia Ridge program whether drinkers will need to register before going to the pub and order using an app, Mr. Hancock said, that is the sort of thing we're looking at for now. They've no imagination, these guys. A computer and an app, it has to work, What else can we do? Throw it out the window and let the folk mingle. Huh? Let them mingle. That's what they did in Sweden, I swear. And then most folk don't get sick from this, They don't. They don't even know they've had it. And you've got to get herd immunity. You've got to get it. But of course the big agenda is to make sure you get the vaccine regardless of your own immune system. You can always make it better through science, he says. And even then he says it might not last very long, even with theirs, you see. But the problem with the RNA type treatments is that it's going to change your epithelial system in your body, the lining of your heart even, and affects the testes, just like the virus itself does, apparently. And it also will change the linings, the composition to the extent of your lungs. It'll genetically modify them. Okay, So here you go, you have to register for having a drink now, Yeah, amazing. Oh, here you go too. And the step previously taken in countries such as New Zealand will allow for easier tracing of customers if someone who went to the venue is found to have been infected. They're talking about the contact tracing. But Mr. Johnson in Britain now looks certain to have the social distance as long as other protections such as face coverings are used in a crucial moment for the coronavirus battle Tuesday. So they might go down to 1 meter rule. I guess they have to tell the virus, look, now you have to self-destruct at 1 meter. The old 2 meter gone, and 6 feet when it's gone. So it's down to half that, you see. So self-destruct at 3 feet. There you go. Around that distance. Next phase of lockdown, loosening from July 4th, will also permit hairdressers to roll up the shutters in a boost for thousands of barbers and millions of shaggy-haired Britons in need of a trim. There you go, Downstream insisted no final decision has yet been taken on restarting the £130 a year domestic tourism industry. Oh, God, I tell you. Why not just open it all up and call it a mass demonstration and forget all the rules and everything and let the folk make money and see what happens then? That would be all right, wouldn't it? That would be all right. It might just work, wouldn't it? I'll also put up, once again, the link to Seattle is Dying, the documentary that came out about a year or two ago, showing it was all happening with the incredible tent cities, drugs, everything, an economy that had completely altered and was stagnant, with a service economy from imported goods from abroad. That's across the country too, mind you, across the world that's signed on to the free trade deal. But the fallout comes across the board to people who used to have work, factory works, and so all gone with free trade, of course.
planned by those who run the world system at the WEF. So I'll put that up again, that link. It's worth watching. Remember too that the Irish Sentinel's back up again, and I'll leave the link there for those who want to go in and see what the latest topics are. And you can read the articles by Hell in a Handbasket. And that's really about it for the day. I could have gone on too with more in-depth stuff, but the thing is, I understand most folk really don't want too much in-depth information on it. Some do, but at least I put the articles out there. You can look things up for yourselves and study them, because when you get a glimpse of how intense and how detailed everything that happens is, and how everything that happens is completely interconnected, whether it's demonstrations, whether it's riots at the moment, to give you that impression of the necessity for a complete change in government systems. That's what it's really meant to do. And the COVID thing, the lockdown and coming back right after mass protests, it's okay to lock folk down again, you know, no mentioning the fact what happened during any kind of spread at all during protesting and stuff like that. So yeah, I could go into it in more and more depth, but most folk really don't want it. They can't really handle it too long. Some people do, but at least information is out there for those that want it. Remember, you don't depend on government to tell you what to do for yourself. You better start thinking for yourselves quickly. A lot of folk are, because we've never seen a time when governments backed off all at once, like uniformly, prearranged, obviously, prearranged folks to all step back at the same time and allow this kind of thing to happen. Don't you get it? Prearranged, massive organisation again. Everybody pretty well on board with it. Just step right back and let things happen, because you're bringing in a new system, and it's not the rioters' system. They might think it is, but it's to suit those who already rule over you and have ruled over you for an awful long time. That's what it's for, and that's who it's by. For those who have a small support group in their area, maybe family or friends and so on, it's all the better. You definitely should be working together to keep each other going and fed at the very least, and helping each other out to get to groceries and that kind of thing, and maybe even preparations for even worse scenarios if they happen to be fomented with the authorities way above us, because they will certainly allow it if it need be. And you better start taking care of yourselves from different circumstances and figure out things to do under certain circumstances, etc. Very important, folks. Don't sit and wait for things to happen, because when you've seen generals step back, members of the military-industrial complex who are there to fill their own pockets, as opposed to help the country, stand back and allow things to happen, and even saying that they wouldn't back up the president and going to do anything, then you've got the police situation where they won't do anything either, because it's not safe for them to do it, because they can't get backing either from superiors and politicians. No one's going to lose their job over upsetting certain segments at this moment, and that's plain to see. So you have to take care of yourselves, because this could turn into a horror show very quickly with another incident, if that is what the big boys want themselves. They certainly want a regime change, but it's not going to be what you think is. This is the same change, the post-democratic system that the Club of Rome, which is part of the WEF, has been talking about for years. A post-democratic system, they got to ram it in, and this is their way of doing it, for those who haven't figured that out yet. So anyway, hang in there and keep in touch, the folk out there. It's very important as we go through this scenario, and it's not finished yet, as you know. This is to bring in a new system that was been planned a long time ago, and it's a way to do it. From myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, this good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.